Welcome to Square Pegs, everyone. My name's Jay. Today, I want to share with you the 10 games on the NES that I go back to repeatedly. Now, this is going to be the first in a series. I'm going to be sharing some other consoles down the road, probably do this about once a month. Let you know the 10 that I go back to regularly for each console. But right now, let's kick things off with a sports classic on the NES. I have put so many hours into Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, it's not even funny, and I got a confession to make here. I've never beaten Tyson. I am terrible at this game. Like, I can get to pretty much Soda Popinski without a problem, and then just, like, the wheels come off. But it's a game that I love. There's something just truly special about the overall simplicity of this game, and the fact that 30 plus years later, I'm still learning new stuff about it. Like, I found out from Gary at Rock Solid Productions that you can duck in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! I had no idea. That completely changes everything. If you have never played Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, it is one of those just touchstone, just foundational games for the NES that I think everyone needs to play at least once. Even if you are not a sports fan, if you're not a boxing fan, if you hate Mike Tyson, you can get Punch-Out! Starring Mr. Dream. But regardless, this is just such a wonderful game and such a classic kind of introduction to rhythm games, believe it or not, that you're going to want to try this one out. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Is something that I love, and I play it regularly. I'm not going to say I play it every year, but it's something I play probably every couple of years, and I just go back to constantly, and it never gets old. Beautiful sprites, wonderful gameplay. It's just about perfect. There's a couple choice puzzle games on the NES that I really loved, and one of the best ones I really feel is Kickle Cubicle. This is one, I remember when I got this one, that I saw the box art and I kind of rolled my eyes because I was like, oh, this is going to be stupid. And, oh man, once I figured out what I was doing, I became kind of obsessed with it. I don't want to say Kickle Cubicle is an overly challenging game because I think with any kind of attention span, you're going to be able to figure out the pattern you need to follow to be able to complete the levels, but it's something that provides enough of a challenge and has just a hint of franticness in it that you're going to probably miss some things as you go and have to retry levels. But I mean, the overall game is pretty straightforward. You freeze enemies, you kick them, they turn into ice cubes, and you can use them to get to treasure bags. It's a very fun game. Like, it's just a super simple, straightforward, and easy to play game, and I think it's something where I think so many people get wrapped up on the NES with platformers and action games that they overlook puzzle games. And the puzzle games they don't overlook are things like Tetris and Dr. Mario, which are fantastic, but games like Kickle Cubicle offer something truly unique that I think more people need a chance to play. In 1989, there were two things I was obsessed with. One was Bill and Ted, the other was the Batman. Tim Burton's Batman released in 1989, and I fell head over heels in love with the vision that he had for the character and the world that he created of his just insane, fantastical Gotham City. And as a kid that was just starved for NES games and wanted nothing more than to play NES games, the Batman game that released was a revelation. It is probably my favorite superhero game of the 8-bit generation, and I realize that there's not a whole lot of great competition to go up against it, but when you consider that this game is as good as some of the non-licensed platformers like the Mega Man games and the Mario games, this game is spectacular. It's truly challenging. It has amazing sprite work. I love that Batman is fuchsia and blue. I think he looks incredible. It's a great way to make him stand out from the dark backgrounds of Gotham City, and it's such a creative usage of both the character and the different gadgets that he has in the game. I love this game so much. Russ Lyman, if you don't follow him, you absolutely should, because Russ has done some live streams of this game lately, and it's fantastic, as well as a 60-second review of the game. So definitely check his channel out, but Batman is incredible. It was really hard for me to pick between Commando and this game, but Gunsmoke is the one that I go back to the most frequently. I don't know why I love this game so much. I was never a huge fan of Westerns as a kid, but this game just worked for me. This felt like I was playing an arcade game at all times when I had it at home. I love the overall simplicity of this game. You're just going on an endless scrolling screen until you have enough points and funds to purchase the wanted poster to fight the boss at the end. It's just a simple but rewarding game that is so easy to pick up and drop into, you don't really need to explain anything. You just know that A shoots left, B shoots right, both of them together shoot straight forward. That's all you need. The game is truly challenging at times. It's a frantic shoot 'em up as you're playing and moving around the screen, and I just think it's a lot of fun. Make sure you're buying upgrades, conserving your ammunition, and using those weapons against the end bosses. It's going to make things a lot easier. The game is just absolutely brilliant. I love Gunsmoke. It's something that I don't think gets a lot of recognition, and I wish it did, but absolutely worth checking out. Absolutely one of my favorites on the system. As much as I've talked about Mega Man 2 on this channel, Mega Man 3 is something that I love almost equally as much. This is easily in my top 10, if not my top 5 of NES games, and there's just something kind of wonderful about it. Like, there's all kinds of little quality of life improvements in the game. This is the first one where we have the slide introduced, we get Proto Man introduced, Rush is in this game. There's a lot of pluses added onto Mega Man 3 that make it, frankly, in a lot of people's eyes, the superior game, and I can't fault anyone who thinks that. Mega Man 2 is the one that I go with just because that's the one that brought me to the dance. Mega Man 3 is a truly challenging game with wonderful robot masters, fantastic power-ups, beautiful level designs, and just a killer soundtrack that, God, I just love it. It's truly one of the best games on the NES, a fantastic action platformer that I think everyone needs to play at least once, and this is something I go back to year over year. Like, Mega Man 2 and Mega Man 3 are things I do not miss every year. They are things I play through every year, and I love them. Definitely check out Mega Man 3 if you've never had the chance to. It's available on the Switch on the Mega Man Legacy Collection as well as other platforms, so don't think you're pigeonholed into buying this on the NES on an expensive cart. You're able to get it on modern consoles and have the entire collection available whenever you want it. Hey, just breaking in real quick. Just want to let you know I do a couple of these videos every week, and I would love to have you stick around. If you're digging the channel, why don't you hit that subscribe button? Now, let's get back to the games. Alright, well, I won't talk about Super Mario Bros. 2 or Mega Man 2 on this video. You are not going to get me to stop talking about Star Tropics. Now, I've told the story a million times about how Star Tropics was the only game I was ever able to call the counselor line on because I couldn't beat the ghost boss. I didn't know what the hell to do. So I'm not going to tell that one again here, even though I just kind of gave you the Reader's Digest version. But Star Tropics to me is something that was really an ambitious title, and it's really a fascinating history behind the game. It was created by the North American studio. It wasn't created over in Japan. And it's something that was pretty much exclusively for our market, and it wasn't something that I think anyone ever thought was going to be successful, and a lot of people fell in love with it. It hasn't aged great. There's definitely some parts of it that I look at and I go, God, this is such a terrible mechanic. But when it released, it was kind of groundbreaking. The game's really fun. It has a magnificent soundtrack and just wonderful character designs as you play. The enemies are great. The actual different environments you go to are really fun. And it's something that I just love to play and I love to go back to because it presents a unique challenge every time I play it, because it's never the same thing twice. Like, the levels are the same, sure, but it's always a challenge because there's always a different pattern that the enemies are going to follow. It's always going to be something where you actually have to challenge yourself a little bit more to get through without dying. It's a fantastic game. I encourage everyone to play it if they haven't already. It is available on the Switch Online service, so definitely worth checking out. I just love this one. While some people had Double Dragon, I had River City Ransom, and it's something that I play pretty frequently to this day. Either this original version of it, any of the re-releases that have happened on other platforms, or now River City Girls that is occurring on modern day consoles. But River City Ransom, the original, is incredible, and I don't know that people really give it the credit that it's due. Like, I know people love this game because it is absolutely phenomenal, but I think when you stop and think about what this game did by blending the beat-em-up genre and RPGs together into just an almost flawless experience, that it's kind of remarkable. Like, consider the fact that you have this incredible beat-em-up mechanic that goes through all these different levels in River City, but then you get to the city sections and you're able to replenish your hit points, increase attributes, purchase gear, learn new techniques by reading books. It's an action RPG. It's amazing. I love River City Ransom. I love the character designs. It is just like signature NES. Like, that is one of the first character designs I think of when I think of the NES, are the characters from River City Ransom and Crash and the Boys Street Challenge and Super Dodgeball. These are all things that I picture immediately when I think of the NES. River City Ransom is one of the best games released ever on the NES, and it's something I go back to almost every year. Coming to us from the team that brought us Kirby is The Adventures of Lolo, and I love Lolo. I really think this is kind of like Kickle Cubicle, just a really fascinating puzzle game that so many people just either forget existed or overlook completely because of the cutesy mascot, and they don't really want to play puzzle games on the NES. And while I can't really fault them for it, they're missing out on something really remarkable and beautifully designed. You play as Lolo, and your mission is to rescue Princess Lala. And you do that by collecting hearts, moving things around, and avoiding enemies while you collect the treasure chest. It's a very simple, direct game that I really enjoy playing, and it's something where I find the puzzles challenging enough that even when I come back to it after a couple of years, it's not something where I breeze just through it. I need to reacclimate myself to the game and the puzzles that are presented to me. It's a really wonderful game. I come back to it pretty regularly. Any of the Lolo games are great, but Adventures of Lolo, the first one, is my favorite. While some people had baseball stars, like me, because I really like baseball stars, my favorite baseball game on the NES was Baseball Simulator 1000. And now there's not a whole lot to really say about this game that isn't kind of the equivalent of every other baseball game on the NES. The mechanics are pretty much identical. You had a very limited number of buttons that you could work with, so you kind of know what you're going to get. A threw the ball, A swung the bat, you pressed the D-pad where you wanted to run or throw to. That's about it. But where this game really stands out, which I didn't capture footage of, which seems really stupid now that I'm thinking about it, is that the special teams had powers with their hitting and their pitching. The mechanics in this game are just wackadoo. It's so much fun to play. It really put something special into the game of baseball and made it more than just sprites running around in a diamond on the screen. It was a truly enjoyable experience and an exciting game to play, and something that I still play regularly to this day. I love Baseball Simulator 1000. I love its sequel, Super Baseball Simulator 1000 on the SNES. And if you have not played this one and you are a baseball fan at all, definitely check it out. It is probably my favorite baseball experience from the 8-bit era. While I maintain that Super Mario Bros. 2 is my favorite Mario game released on the NES, I can't fault a single person that would say, no, it's Super Mario Bros. 3, and here's why. Because it's an amazing game. I remember discovering this game because I went to go see The Wizard in the theaters when it released, and I remember seeing this show up at the end, and the guy said, "You are going to play Super Mario Bros. 3!" And I was so excited because I was like, oh my god, there's a Mario 3. This is incredible. And it was something that I just look at and I fell in love with. And I actually got to play this on a Play Choice 10 at Highland Pizza in Fall River, Massachusetts. And yeah, I think we bought it like a week later because it was that good. Because I loved it that much. Mario 3 is a absolutely superlative platformer on the NES. It's a ton of fun to play. It introduced a variety of power-ups into the equation as opposed to just having the Fire Flower and the Super Mushroom. And it's something that I think a lot of people just kind of inherently know and love. And it's so easy to fall back into. It's like pulling up a warm blanket when you want to play this game. It's just that good and such a wonderful feeling when you power it up and play it. When it came to the 16-bit generation, you were either a Genesis kid or a Super Nintendo kid, and I was a Genesis kid. I love the Super Nintendo, don't get me wrong, but the thing I played most of my games on was the Sega Genesis. I'm gonna be honest with you, that library holds up to this day. There are some fantastic Genesis games out there. Today, I'm gonna prove it. We're gonna look at 10 Genesis games that I just cannot get enough of. There's a lot of beat-em-ups on this list, but that's okay because, I mean, that's kind of what the Genesis was to me. It was my brawler machine. And one of my favorites, I talked about it a few weeks ago, it's TMNT, the Hyperstone Heist. This game is just gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's fast, it's fun, it's exciting. It captures the spirit of the cartoon and a little bit of the comics. It's definitely more of the animated series than it is the more aggressive and kind of violent comic books, but it does everything right. Like, I enjoy Hyperstone Heist more than I enjoy Turtles in Time, and I know that's sacrilege for some people, but to me, this just plays faster and feels more like the arcade experience than Turtles in Time does. The game is gorgeous to look at, as it is a Genesis game, and the music in Hyperstone Heist doesn't hit quite as well as the music in Turtles in Time, but I can overlook that, I guess overhear that, or underhear, I don't know. I can ignore that, that's the word I'm looking for. I can ignore that in favor of the fact that I just think the gameplay is so well done. This feels like an arcade experience at home. It plays like it animates beautifully, it looks great, and I just cannot tell you how much of a wonderful game it is. Hyperstone Heist is brilliant. Can't wait for the Cowabunga collection to have it on my Switch. It is just a lovely title and just such a great experience for fans of the Turtles. I love Ghouls and Ghosts. I am so glad that I did not stop with this series on the NES, because Ghosts and Goblins was not a game for me. And I am so happy that a game like this, like Ghouls and Ghosts on the Genesis, exists, because this is such a wonderful arcade port. And while it's still unbelievably difficult, it's a lot more forgiving, not necessarily by being easier, but by being more well-designed than what Ghosts and Goblins is. It feels like a full experience. Ghosts and Goblins just feels cruel for the sake of being cruel. Ghouls and Ghosts is hard, but there's more exciting things that you're able to do. The different magics that you're able to get, the golden armor, the different weapons, everything just looks bigger, feels better in Ghouls and Ghosts. And I mean, yeah, a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's a 16-bit console versus an 8-bit, but I don't know. I just think that there's something so completely different in this game than what's compared to the NES demake that I love this game. It's very hard. I've never beaten it. I'm terrible at it. I'm lucky I beat the ogre boss in the first level, honestly, because that doesn't happen very frequently for me. But the game itself is something that I treasure and something I go back to frequently, even though I suck at it. And that says something about a game's quality and something about how much I enjoy a title. If I'm willing to keep going back to it despite the fact that I'm awful at it, it's going to be something I'm playing for a long time to come. One of the best things about the Sega Genesis is the fact that it plays like an arcade console in your home. Now, there were arcade ports on the NES, and those were great, and they felt okay, but I couldn't convince myself that they were the same game. Like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, wasn't the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game. It was there in name and there in spirit, but it wasn't a one-for-one. And while, yeah, we don't get 100% one-for-one arcade ports onto the Genesis, things like Outrun are so close that I can forgive it because it's just such a wonderful experience. Now, Outrun, if you like arcade racers, if you play things on the Switch like Slipstream, this is a game that if you have never played it, you need to check out because it's such a simple, easy to digest design. You drive, you can shift your gears up and down, and as you go, you need to hit your checkpoints to make sure that you're able to keep driving as you go through this map. You're going to be able to choose different paths and find different areas throughout the world that you're able to go to. It's just such a simple, fun game. It has great music. It has a great stylized design. There are some things where you're going to get some flashing screen warnings, so if you do have issues with flashing screens, this might not be the game for you, but I love it. I have a lot of fun with it, and it's something that I loved in the arcade, and getting it at home on the Genesis just speaks volumes to how wonderful of an experience it is. I remember playing Rocket Knight Adventure when it released and falling head over heels in love with it and then completely forgetting about it. Like, it was a game that I rented, I enjoyed, I thought it was a brilliant game, and then I completely forgot about it for like 15 years. And there was a remake that was released on Steam, and I saw it, and I was like, why does this little possum guy look so familiar to me? And I started playing it, and I was like, oh my god, it was the Genesis game that I loved so much that I used to rent from the Apothecary. And being able to get back into it on the Genesis and just falling right into it. Now, I'm not going to tell you this is the perfect platformer. It's not the perfect platformer. It definitely has its flaws. There's definitely things that it does that just don't work for modern gamers, but to me, this is kind of an unbelievable exercise in what platformers could be when they weren't beholden to previous designs. Things like the Mario games kind of fell in line with what games had come before. Things like the Sonic games followed the same beats that they had in previous versions. But Rocket Knight, this was completely new. And it was excellent. The ability to blast off and launch yourself over barricades, the sword that you have, being able to hang from different grind rails and things like that as you slide along and go launch yourself up. It's really just a wonderful experience. There's so many amazing platformers on the Genesis that it's hard to pick just one. And I mean, spoilers, I have another one in here as we go, but Rocket Knight to me is just one of those games that I love and I go back to all the time. It's a brilliant game. If you've never played it, it's worth checking out. It does something a little bit different than any other platformer out there, and I think that should be celebrated. Gameground is one of those games that I didn't really play when I was younger, but as I got older, I kind of picked it up on a whim and realized how incredible this game really is. This is just unbelievable arcade action at home on your Genesis. And it's a really tricky game. So as you play, the idea is to get your characters to the exit. That or defeat all the enemies on the screen. And that's not as easy as it sounds. It's a really tricky, difficult game because the characters you start off with have different abilities. You have the caveman that can throw his spear in all different directions. You have the guy with a gun, and you have the girl with grenades that can only shoot or fire the grenades forward in a straight line. So you have to pick the right character for the scenario, and if you lose a character, you're stuck with only one of the characters you have left. Now, one of the things I really love about this game is that you can pick up different characters as you play. There will be things that look like little statues on the map that are kind of shining different colors, and if you grab them and get to the exit, you're going to be able to use them in subsequent levels. It's a really stupidly simple and brilliant design that really harkens back to just what makes video games great. You take such a simple concept of beat the enemies or escape, and you put this clever spin on it of the different characters you're able to unlock, the different abilities that they all have, and the different way that each character plays, and it just makes Gameground an unbelievably exciting and fulfilling experience. So I have to admit, for the longest time, I didn't really understand what the big deal was about Castlevania Bloodlines. I was a huge Super Castlevania 4 fan, and there was just something about that omnidirectional whip that you could use in that game that really captured me. Going back after I got the Sega Genesis Mini and playing it then and continuing to play it now, I see what the brilliance is in the game. It's an absolutely masterfully crafted version of the original Castlevania with enough changes and enough alterations to the original pacing and kind of layout of how things go to make it completely new and completely interesting for a Sega console. I really like that you're able to choose from two different characters in this. The game feels completely different depending upon who you're using, and that's really what you're looking for in a game like this. Gorgeous graphics, really good sound for a Genesis game. Sound is usually where Genesis games kind of fall on their face, but this one actually has really good sound. Konami really kind of nailed it on this one. I've been going back and playing this a lot since I got my Genesis Mini, and I really can't say enough good things about this. Everyone who told me I was wrong for liking Super Castlevania 4, well, I'm not going to say you're right, because I still like Super Castlevania 4 as well, but you were right about this game. Comix Zone is the most NES hard game, I think, on the Genesis to me. There's other games that are really difficult, stuff like Gunstar Heroes and things like that are super, super hard games, but Comix Zone is the one that I think is probably the most unforgiving, and I think that might be why I keep coming back to it. For one, the game is gorgeous. This is an absolutely brilliant layout and something that hasn't really been done a lot since this game or before this game. Framing things within comic book panels and making you actually move through the story and having a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure as well, depending on what path you take, really is kind of magical and is just an absolutely fantastic experience to play. I love this game. I think it's an absolutely fantastic beat-em-up. It does something that no other beat-em-up game does by putting you in this really stylized and just slick environment that most beat-em-up games kind of default to just this grungy cityscape that you're fighting your way through. And yeah, you have that in Comix Zone, sure, but having it set in the panels and having the eraser and having the different abilities and having the conversation that the character has with his creations in the comic itself just really sets Comix Zone apart. There's so much appeal to this game and so much it does unbelievably well that I have come back to it for decades, and I will continue to play it for decades to come. What more really needs to be said about Sonic the Hedgehog 2 than has already been said, but I mean, that doesn't really make for good video content, does it? So let me give it a shot here. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 does so much so well and improves upon so many areas from the first game, but does it so subtly that it doesn't feel like it's something that's unfamiliar. You still feel like you're playing a Sonic the Hedgehog game, just with some serious quality of life improvements. Of course, we get the introduction to Tails. Worlds are a little bit shorter. You only have 2 rounds in them as opposed to 3. The music is fantastic. The design of the game is beautiful. The boss fights are a lot of fun. The bonus rounds are excellent. There's so much that this does perfectly well. It is a very unforgiving game, as every Sonic the Hedgehog game is, and it just feels so fast that it lives up to its namesake, and it just delivers on every promise that the game made when it was first revealed. It's something I go back to all the time. I play it on my Switch. I play it on my Genesis. I play it on handhelds with emulators. It is something I love and I have loved for 30 years, and I will love it forever. It is a brilliant title. Everyone has played it at this point, and if you haven't, do it. I really think it's a shame that the Genesis didn't have more readily recognizable RPGs on it, because most of them went to the Super Nintendo. And while that is true, there were definitely some games on the Genesis that really stuck out to me. Everyone knows the Phantasy Star series. It's a fantastic series. But for me, Shining Force was the way to go, and Shining Force is such a lovely, interesting take on what a tactical RPG could be. This was one of the first tactical RPGs I'd ever played, and it's so smartly designed and so cleverly written that you just kind of fall in love with the characters. The ability to move yourself around the battlefield and position yourself and think a couple steps ahead about where you want to set your characters up and what you want to do with their attacks or their magic or their healing really was different than anything I had personally experienced at the time. Now, it's kind of old hat now, things like Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, Advance Wars, but Shining Force was the first I had ever really seen and the first I had ever really experienced, and it did something that nothing else had ever done for me at that time, and it made me want to think a little bit more ahead with how I was playing my RPGs. It's a brilliant game. If you've never played Shining Force, it is worth tracking down either in physical form or picking up something like the Genesis Mini or the Sega Genesis Collection on the different platforms that are available today on modern consoles, and checking out. Today I am responding to a video that I was tagged in a couple weeks ago by my friends Scott and Jen over at Retro Rivals. Please be sure to go over to their channel and check it out. Subscribe right away because they're fantastic. So I'm supposed to give you my 5 games that I keep coming back to, and I'm going to do that, and I will also take from Scott and Jen and actually put an honorable mention in here because I can never do just 5. It's not easy when you have a ton of games to play. But I am adding the added difficulty bonus on here because I talk about Nintendo all the time on this channel. It is probably the thing I talk about more than anything else. I wanted to make sure I didn't just stick to Nintendo consoles. I wanted to kind of spread the love a little bit, so I'm going to be talking about Xbox, Sony, and Sega on this one as well. And up first is one of my favorite RPGs from the Xbox 360, and that is Dragon Age Origins Ultimate Edition. Dragon Age is a really interesting title for me on a personal level. It's a game that I'd been at a fever pitch for when it was announced, and it combined 2 of my absolute favorite things, high fantasy and BioWare RPG games. And the scene was set. It was a bloody, violent, and deep title full of memorable characters, fun combat, and interesting lore. All that's great, of course, but the thing that makes this memorable for me, and probably why it's something that I hold so dearly to, is that it was the last game I ever bought when I worked at EA. The day before it released, I got called into HR and I was told I had an option. They were letting 1,400 people go worldwide, and I could either relocate to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, uprooting my entire family and being demoted in the process, or I could just leave the company entirely. Taking this as a sign that my career in the game industry was coming to an end, I decided to leave. But before I did, I'd stay on for at least a week while my severance package was drafted and we started working on transition plans. And when Dragon Age launched, I remember buying it and thinking that this was my last hurrah and that it would be the last benefit I ever had from working in games. Of course, I've parlayed that game career into 20 years in quality assurance and software. But at the time, I didn't think that way. For the next year, it was legitimately the only game I would play. I didn't want anything to do with any games, and the only thing that dragged me out of my doldrums was Dragon Age. And to this day, it's a franchise I still enjoy. While Part 2 was flawed, I actually felt that the characters in the game were more memorable, and I felt that the Dragon Age Inquisition game that released on the PS4 and the Xbox One was ultimately a really fun game. But neither one really hold a candle to the original. I've gone back and I've played it numerous times in the 13 years since its initial release, and I see myself continuing to go back to the world of Ferelden to fight the hordes of Darkspawn along Shale, Alistair, Morrigan, and Leliana. It plays very similarly to a lot of BioWare's titles at the time, with familiar nods to both Knights of the Old Republic and Jade Empire, while also borrowing heavily from Mass Effect. Honestly, either of those late 2000s BioWare titles would have been a fantastic conclusion here, as both Dragon Age and Mass Effect are some of my favorite games ever, but Dragon Age gets the nod because of how much I appreciate it for bringing me back to gaming after I felt games weren't something I wanted to give time or energy to anymore. Alright, so honorable mention is out of the way. Dragon Age is a wonderful game, one of my favorite RPGs ever. I think it sets such a wonderful stage of what was to come, sort of with Dragon Age 2 and definitely with Dragon Age Inquisition. Cannot wait for Dragon Age 4, but let's get into the top 5 now, shall we? And the one that I'm kicking things off with is one of my favorite Dreamcast games. I wish I still had the CD case for it. Unfortunately, it just lives in a folder. But right now, we are talking about one of the best fighting games ever. Power Stone.
Turn, walk, are you ready?
I vividly remember the first time I saw Power Stone. But to tell you that story, I need to tell you about the magical place that I discovered it in. Rocky's Replay. I wish the footage I'm showing you here from Treasure X Star's channel was of the original configuration of the arcade, not its second location, because the original location was in a building a quarter mile from the front door of my apartment. It was a wonderland, a cramped former restaurant that was gutted and turned into a magical arcade experience. Home of the 25-cent hot dog of questionable origin, Rocky's always had the latest and greatest arcade machines to try out. And I would stop there frequently as I'd walk home from my early morning coffee shop job. I was a fighting game fiend, and I would stop at Rocky's almost every day to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Street Fighter 3. But one day I walked in and saw for the first time the gloriousness that was the Power Stone cabinet. I think I spent 2 or 3 hours playing that day, trading off and watching other people play, putting my quarters up on the cabinet, learning different techniques from their fights, and just being in awe of this incredible new 3D arena fighter from Capcom. And when it released later that year on the Dreamcast, oh my god, it was heaven. This was a frequent game utilized in our Friday night fight tournaments, and it's something that was just so damn captivating and enjoyable because of how completely different it was from anything else we were playing at the time. To this day, I still find it to be one of the most satisfying fighting game experiences out there. The characters are memorable, the fighting is fun, the specials are great, the weapons are amazing, and the design of the world is picture perfect. This truly is the series I want most for Capcom to revisit and re-release. I was hoping that we would get some in the Capcom Fighting Collection, we would see Power Stone or Power Stone 2 in there, but I'm hoping that if we are lucky enough to get a Capcom Fighting Collection 2, they're put in there. I think the games are that good. I think they are the upper echelon of Capcom fighting games, and I think more people deserve the opportunity to play them. Yeah, so Power Stone, if you have not played it, it is legit one of the best multiplayer experiences out there, one of the best single-player experiences out there, and just a fantastic game. One of my favorite fighters ever. I loved it in arcades. I loved it on the Dreamcast. I wish that this franchise hadn't died with Power Stone 2 because I honestly think it is one of the freshest fighting games ever and just such a breath of fresh air that Capcom desperately needed. But let's go on to the next one, shall we? And this is a game that I have talked about countless times on the channel, and this is something that I have played religiously for, almost 30 years now, and that is NHL 95. NHL 95 is, without question, my most played game in my life. I have played countless hours of NHL 95 since it initially released, both at home on my Sega Genesis, at my friend David's home on his SNES, and countless other emulation machines throughout the years. I have played so many different seasons of this game using my favorite team, the Boston Bruins, as well as other favorites like the Vancouver Canucks, Philadelphia Flyers, Quebec Nordique, and the Hartford Whalers. Everything that NHL 95 did is what I use as a benchmark to compare other hockey games to this day. The game captured perfectly what was the essence of my favorite sport, showcasing the speed, power, and hard-hitting violence of the game. I've played nearly every version of NHL that EA has produced, and I don't know that they've ever gotten it more correct than they have here. Sure, later releases saw additions like Be a Pro and Franchise Mode, but all subsequent releases have been chasing the beautiful and perfect simplicity that was the gameplay of 95. There's a certain kind of nostalgia that definitely impacts me here, of course, but I look at things like later versions of Madden and the Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy PGA series that EA produced, and I see games that have had massive improvements to their overall gameplay. Meanwhile, nothing the NHL series does feels like it's really made any market improvement because of how good this game was. A couple of years ago, EA released NHL 94 Rewind, an updated version of an equally excellent game which included modern rosters and teams. And I really wish they had continued to use other older games and release budget-friendly digital-only games like that, as I would have loved to have seen modern take on NHL 95 with today's players and team bases, and maybe include something like a 16-bit friendly version of Franchise or GM mode. And truth be told, NHL 95 is probably here as an analog for the entire NHL series, if I'm being honest, as I've played so many of them, but its inclusion over the 30 other entries in the series shows just how incredible of a title it really is. So why NHL 95? What makes NHL 5 so special? Well, to me, it's just because I love it so much. It is the game that I kind of cut my teeth on. I loved the first NHL, I loved NHLPA, I loved 94, but this one right here is the one that's special to me. This is one I have memories of with my friend David. This is the one that I put hundreds of hours into when I was a kid, and I still play it regularly today. I still play it as an adult. I think it's that good of a game. I think it's the best NHL game EA has ever made. All right, I'm going to stick with sports now, but this is a little bit different kind of sports, and this is going to be more extreme sports, and this is something that everyone I know who has played this game just adores it because of how quality it is, and that is SSX Tricky.
Welcome to Garibaldi.
Straight up, for someone who has never, ever done the sport in his life, I love snowboarding games. The Cool Borders franchise was one of my most played series on the PS1. The 1080 franchise from Nintendo is one of my most beloved IPs that Nintendo has jettisoned into the sun. Hell, I even love Steep and Riders Republic from Ubisoft. But none of them, none, hold a candle to any of the SSX series, with the #1 title being SSX Tricky. Tricky elevates everything the original game did, and it adds so much content. New trick styles, more riders, more boards, more outfits, huge mountains, incredible courses, fun music, and amazing voice acting from people like Lucy Liu, Billy Zane, Oliver Platt, and Macy Gray make this one of the most fully realized and enjoyable gaming experiences I've ever had. The game just works, and is one of the most easily accessible and enjoyable racing experiences of anything I've ever played. One of the unsung aspects of the game is the rivalry system that's in place. If you race a clean race with someone, they'll start to like you more and treat you more favorably. But if you race them aggressively, collide with someone repeatedly, and generally be a nuisance to them, they'll retaliate in future races and make it significantly harder for you to successfully complete races. It's a balancing act of trying to maintain order in what is an inherently chaotic game, and I love that it can be so impactful to your experience. There's so much to love about SSX Tricky, not the least of which is the fact that it's just so easy to pick up and play. If you don't want to do tricks, you can just run it as a straight-up race, but if you'd rather focus on big air, grinds, and huge trick combos, you can do that too. I come back to the entire SSX series regularly, but Tricky was the one that introduced me to the series and made me a believer. Not only is this game just fantastic, not only does it have incredible stunts in the game that you're able to play, amazing career modes, fantastic unlockables, tons of characters that you're able to play as, different boards that you're able to get, costumes, the whole nine. Like, the game's soundtrack is also incredible. I could not play any of it on this video because it's all licensed music, but artists like Run DMC, Mixmaster Mike, Skank, there's so many amazing musical artists in here, and that's even before we get to the regular composed music for the game as well, with all the different character themes. Everything in this game sounds incredible. It plays wonderfully. It's the perfect version of what a snowboarding game should be, and it's the best EA Sports big game ever released. Next up, I could show you any number of games from the Uncharted series. I fell in love with it the first time I saw it. It's a brand new version of Indiana Jones. It's a witty game. It's fun. It's smartly designed. It's beautiful to look at. It's great to play. The storylines are wonderful, and the voice acting is incredible. But the one that hooked me, and the one that I always go back to, is this guy right here, Uncharted 4.
So who do you think these guys are?
Uncharted for me was one of those kind of faraway franchises that I admired, but I never really had a chance to play it. I didn't own a PS3 until years after I'd owned a PS4, so when the series first released, I thought it looked amazing, but as an Xbox 360 owner, it was way out of my wheelhouse. But the PS4, on the other hand, that was right up my alley. I'd been excited about the console as my friend Nate was telling me about it at the school we worked at, and I decided that if I saw a game I was really interested in, I'd pick one up. So when the fourth game was announced, as well as the special edition PS4 Slim featuring Nate Drake on it, I was sold. Booting up the game was a revelation. The introductory level where you play as young Nate escaping from school to go be with his brother Sam immediately had me invested in the characters. Sam's quote-unquote death as Nate, Sam, and Rafe escaped from jail was a gut punch. I'd just met this character. Everything about this game was a home run for me. Nolan North, Emily Rose, Troy Baker, and Richard McGonigal delivered some of the best performances I've ever experienced in a video game as Nate, Elena, Sam, and Sully. And that's before we even get to Warren Cole and Laura Bailey as the heavies of the game, Rafe and Nadine. I was completely enthralled with both the story and the acting in the game, to say nothing of the excellent gameplay, gorgeous visuals, and exciting combat. I'm showing you here the PS5 version of the game, and it's only been boosted by the incredible power of that machine. Uncharted 4 has become comfort food for me. When I feel like playing something but I don't really know what to play, I can pop this game in and instantly be transported into a world of swashbuckling high adventure, treasure hunting, and a band of lovable miscreants that can't help but fall into situations that are fantastical and beyond belief. Truth be told, I love the entire series. All 5 games are remarkable experiences and testaments to the storytelling Naughty Dog is capable of. But Uncharted 4, Thief's End, is the one I always come back to.
Keep me updated.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I know for so many people, Uncharted 2 is their #1 game, and Uncharted 2 is a spectacular title, don't get me wrong, I love it. But Uncharted 4 for me was the first game I played, so there's a lot of kind of nostalgia bias here. I hadn't played any of the previous Uncharteds. I didn't own a PS3 until well after I owned a PS4, so I had never played it up until that point. So for me, the first one I played was Uncharted 4, and I just loved the story of Nate and Sam and Sully. It's just, I think the ending kind of had a little bit to do with it as well. Going into it and knowing that this was the last game we were going to get with Nate Drake, although fingers crossed that isn't the case and we get more down the road. The ending and the epilogue of the story, and I don't want to spoil it even though the game is older at this point, it's emotionally impactful, and it was something that I go back to probably every year I play it. I would say maybe every 2 years I go back and play it, but it's something that I just thoroughly enjoy. I'm playing it again on the PS5 right now, and to me, it's the ultimate in the series. Uncharted 4 is just that special to me. All right, and the final one from a series that has just captured my mind and is my personal favorite Sony exclusive franchise, and that is the original Ratchet & Clank. When the PlayStation 2 launched, I didn't pick one up. I was perfectly happy to play my friend Chris's machine while I eventually played my Dreamcast and my PS1. It just wasn't enough for me to get excited about outside of Tekken Tag Tournament and a few other titles. I didn't really like the design of the original machine. It looked like bricks. So for years, I didn't play anything on the PS2. I mean, I eventually got a GameCube and an original Xbox, but the PS2 just didn't interest me. Until Ratchet & Clank released. While a lot of folks were swooning over Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank was the one that caught my attention, and I was a hard sell. 3D action games weren't my cup of tea at the time, so I kind of wrote most of them off. But there was just something about that Lombax and his robot pal that intrigued me. Within a few weeks of each other, both the Slimline PS2 and the first Ratchet & Clank game released, and that had me sold. I loved the design of the Slim PS2. But even with that, it would still be years until I got the console in 2005. And the first game I grabbed was the greatest hits release of Ratchet & Clank. My amazing wife got me the Slim PS2, and I was just about to take a bunch of PTO from my work at EA as we had just delivered a game. I played Ratchet & Clank for hours every day. And those hours of gameplay led me to put the game in the upper echelon of PlayStation titles, a place it rightfully deserves and continues to deliver upon. I mean, Rift Apart was my game of the year for a reason last year. I loved the creative world building, amazing visuals, hilarious weapons, and fantastic gameplay that Ratchet & Clank offered, and it was because of that game that I went as far in on the PS2 as I did. And while I might not play this particular copy of the game as often as I could, and truth be told, it's kind of the representative of every Ratchet & Clank game, I enjoy all the ones I've played. There's something still very charming and exciting about going back to that original game and playing it with a DualShock 2. I play this probably every 2 or 3 years, and it's always one of my favorite gaming experiences when I go back to it. So why the original Ratchet & Clank? Well, there's a lot that went into it. The voice acting is amazing, the action in the game is spectacular, the design, the worlds are just gorgeous to behold and so much fun to be a part of, and everything's alive. Like, it feels like a fully realized universe. It's not just like level to level to level. There's so much that goes into it that I just go back to it all the time. And this is kind of a benchmark for the whole series because I don't just play this one. I will be honest. This is kind of cheating here because this is kind of the stand-in for the entire series, kind of like Uncharted is, I guess, really. But with this original Ratchet & Clank, this is the one that captured me. This is the one I went back to constantly and the one that I played repeatedly. And here's something I really like about it that I want to show you that just is incredible and one of my favorite things that Sony did. On the inside, you got a poster. That's great. I love the poster, but I love that the instruction manual looks like blueprints. Like, it's such a clever little touch and such a fantastic attention to detail and such a wonderful way for them to present this that is true to the lore in the game and true to the way the game is presented. I love Ratchet & Clank, and I will play any single one that I have the opportunity to do so. I wanted to talk to you today about what is my favorite console of all time, the Nintendo 3DS. I have been going back to this one a lot lately, knowing that the 3DS eShop is shutting down, knowing that we're about to get the final nail in the coffin for this console right here, and I really just wanted to go back to it and let you know what are the 10 games that I keep going back to. Hey, if you're new around here, please consider subscribing. I do 2 videos a week talking about the best in retro and modern gaming. I'd love to have you stick around. Now, 1 second. Before you watch this video, yes, it's only 10 games. Yes, there are going to be games that you think should be on here that are not on here. Trust me, there will be another entry down the road. I promise you. It will happen. Hold tight. Give me a month or two, okay? So what do you say? Let's go over the 3DS and take a look at the 10 games I keep coming back to. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds is one of those games that I think a lot of folks really love, but kind of forget about because it's completely housed on a handheld platform. And I'm here to tell you that it is, by far, one of the absolute premier Zelda games that Nintendo has ever produced. Featuring a fantastic visual style, gorgeous music, and the signature combat and gameplay style that so many other great versions of Link's adventures have portrayed, where A Link Between Worlds really sets itself apart from the other entries in the series, is the MacGuffin of the game. Link is able to turn himself into a two-dimensional being, like a painting, and move along flat surfaces, allowing him to traverse what would otherwise be unreachable terrain or areas of a dungeon. And all that would be great, but you couple that with an absolutely incredible story, with some of the best dialogue and script work that Nintendo Treehouse localization has ever done, and you're in for an absolute treat. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds is not just a great 3DS game, it's legit a superlative entry in the Zelda mythos, and I'd honestly probably put it in my top 3 in the series, with many days where I would probably consider it my favorite. I wish I was able to capture this directly from my 3DS rather than utilizing an emulator for this, because I think it's going to betray a lot of the fidelity in the game due to the slowdown and general emulation issues, but the game itself is enjoyable no matter how it's played. I love this one. One of my favorite things Nintendo did on the Wii U and the 3DS were the NES Remix games, and they're so brilliantly simple in their executions. Take classic NES games like Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong, Excite Bike, Kirby, Dr. Mario, stuff like that. Chop them up into bite-sized pieces like some of the mini-games from the 9-volt levels in WarioWare, and toss a bunch of random-ass tasks to complete within a time frame, and boom, you've got one of the most fun interpretations of classic games I've ever played. Everything from trying to eliminate a moving virus in Dr. Mario, to jumping over 3 barrels normally in Donkey Kong, to something as simple as speedrunning level 1-1 in Super Mario Bros. Make this one of the most easy to pick up and play games I've ever experienced. It's legitimately just such a joy to jump back into these classic games and play them in slightly new ways. The Cave Story has long been one of my favorite independent titles, and the Cave Story 3D release on the 3DS does so much to, I don't want to say improve upon the original, but it does enough to set itself apart from the OG release. First and foremost, the game backgrounds environments are now rendered in 3D rather than in sprites, so the game now looks almost completely different than its original release, but it's still familiar enough that if you've played the initial version, it'll feel familiar. The gameplay is still solid, and everything moves exactly how you'd expect. The music in the game has seen an upgrade akin to the graphics, where everything feels familiar, just plussed over the original release. And in-game, it's actually a bit more forgiving than the original release was, with far more health packs to pick up, meaning your adventures in the world of Cave Story can go on a little bit longer. That's a good thing, because there's also been 4 more areas added to the game. Is it a huge improvement over the original? Nah. But is it fun? Oh, hell yes. The Mario & Luigi series is one of my favorites. It's something I adored back on the Game Boy Advance, and something I continue to enjoy up through the 3DS. And seriously, Nintendo, where is my Mario & Luigi remastered collection for the Switch? Come on, I'm begging here. Every Mario RPG game is a hit for me, and this takes one of the best in the series, Superstar Saga on the Game Boy Advance, and remasters it for the 3DS, giving you incredible gameplay, beautiful graphics, and legitimately some of the funniest writing for Mario that I've ever experienced. One of the things I love about the Mario & Luigi games is the world traversal, having the different interactive objects that are dependent upon which brother you happen to be controlling, like the brother blocks that you can get tons of coins out of if you correctly jump quickly in sequence by alternating between the A and B buttons. In combat, though, that's where the game really sings, giving you timing-based mechanics to inflict extra attacks or damage, as well as allowing you to jump to avoid or lessen the damage you take from enemy attacks. I was worried when this initially released that it wasn't going to have the same level of magic or polish that the original Game Boy Advance release did, but those fears were put to rest as soon as I played it. It's not only as good as the GBA original, the quality of life improvements as well as the inclusion of the Bowser's Minions side story game improves on an already excellent title. While I don't often talk about Pokemon on the channel, it's not because I don't love the games. Quite to the contrary, I've been playing them since Blue launched, and it's long been one of my favorite franchises. And there's plenty of great Pokemon games on the 3DS, but I'm particularly partial to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I love the Alola setting, and really feel like the changes that they made to the way the game is laid out and executed, by doing away with traditional gym battles in favor of the Kahuna challenges for each island, spoke incredibly highly of the determination of the Pokemon Company to make something unique. And I suspect that I'm probably in the minority in that regard. I know it was a great departure for a lot of people and they weren't a huge fan, but for me, it was the most fun I'd had in Pokemon in ages. The Alolan form Pokemon were great. I love that your rival wasn't really a rival per se, he was just a friend you grew up with. And I really enjoyed the world design in the Alolan Islands. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are good improvements, albeit probably unnecessary ones over Vanilla Sun and Moon, but I think the quality of life improvements and story changes by giving you an honest-to-God gym, which, while I don't really care about it, should make a lot of people happy, as well as giving you more post-game content, puts them over the edge for me. I mean, come on, of course Shantae is on the list. I mean, I've been playing Shantae for over a decade now. I jumped onto the Risky's Revenge, and I was so damn excited when Pirate's Curse released on the 3DS. Visually, this game is leaps ahead of the previous two entries in the series, but it still has that signature way-forward pixel art polish to it that just gives so much depth and life to Shantae's world. Animations are amazing, with detailed character and enemy sprites moving all over the screen, as well as gorgeously detailed environments for Shantae to hair whip and jump through. Pirate's Curse did something really interesting for the series. It took all of Shantae's transformation powers away from her as a result of Risky's Revenge, but it allowed you to explore a huge world in search of pirate artifacts, giving Shantae a ton of fun attacks and abilities to traverse each level. The music in the game is also incredible, which has kind of become an unheralded signature for way-forward titles, but my favorite thing, as always with the Shantae games, is the actual gameplay. It's equal parts classic platformer action while still showing that it is decidedly ret to go to blaze its own path. It's a pricey title nowadays. I was lucky enough to get this when I did because it's now well over $70 complete in box, but it's an incredible experience and well worth tracking down digitally on other platforms like the Switch if you're a fan of the Shantae series. There's something to be said about Square Enix being able to continuously find new ways to make RPGs interesting. But I'll be honest with you, when I first saw footage of Bravely Default, I didn't care. It didn't do much for me visually at a casual glance, and I didn't do enough digging into the game before it released to really see it for what it is. One of the most impressively designed RPGs I've ever played. The Brave and Default systems that allow you to defend to bank attacks or execute multiple attacks in a row is brilliantly implemented and gives a layer of strategy to an already impressive combat system. The world itself is stunningly rendered, and while it admittedly took some getting used to, the character designs have grown on me to the point where they just feel like a different version of the character-based designs from Final Fantasy Tactics. The world in the game is massive, and the traditional RPG tropes are in place, with a plethora of random encounters, treasure to discover, dungeons and caves to dive through, and memorable characters that frequently feature fantastic voice acting, all over an amazing score composed by Revo and performed by Sound Horizon. It's truly one of the best RPGs I've ever played, and one that I've gone back to numerous times, and it's the one that laid the groundwork for my adoration of Bravely Default 2 on the Switch. As much as I love the Shantae series, this right here, Shovel Knight, this is the game that really got me to fall in love with independent video games. When Shovel Knight first got announced on Kickstarter, I was beyond skeptical that they'd be able to deliver on the promises they were making. But I'll be damned if Yacht Club Games not only delivered on the promise, but exceeded every single expectation that was out there. Shovel Knight is, at its core, a very straightforward and simple platformer. You're going to traverse huge levels, find loot, kill enemies, and fight bosses. And that'd be plenty. But instead we got one of the most polished, best playing, and downright hardest platformers I've ever booted up. Shovel Knight is frequently unforgiving and brutal in its execution of its level designs, with challenging jumps, enemy placements, and boss fights that really keep you on your toes and make you have to maintain your focus and time your movements and jumps accurately. But while it's unforgiving, the game is so ridiculously rewarding, with a compelling story, amazing enemies, fantastic boss characters, brilliant and hilarious writing, and some of the absolute best and most satisfying gameplay I've ever experienced in a game. I come back to Shovel Knight regularly on multiple consoles, whether it's the Wii U, Switch, or PC, but the one I played first, and the one I play most frequently, is on the 3DS. I admit it, the inclusion of this game might raise some eyebrows, but hear me out. Despite the fact that Codename Steam only sold something like 10 copies here in the States, okay, in all honesty, it was actually 31,000 copies, but the point remains, it didn't do well. And despite the fact that the premise is weird, and yes, the game is deeply flawed. I mean, enemy turns take like a millennia to complete. I legit believe this is one of the most unique and smartly designed games on the 3DS. I love that this is Nintendo's version of Valkyria Chronicles from Sega, all while cramming in an amazing steampunk design aesthetic from an alternate universe, memorable characters like Abraham Lincoln, John Henry, Tom Sawyer, Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz. This is basically an episode or an issue of Marvel's What If, where Nintendo made the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And then there's the copious amounts of Lovecraft influences in the enemy designs, and the fact that Miskatonic University is part of the game's lore. There's the gorgeous comic book design motif throughout everything, a voice cast that includes Will Wheaton, Gray Delisle, Adam Baldwin, and Michael Dorn. There's so much to enjoy about this game that I truly wish more people had given it a chance. It's a fantastically fun strategy RPG. It is legitimately like a $12 game when it's brand new. I absolutely think this is going to be one of those, how did I never know about this games in about 10 years? Because so many people have overlooked this incredible fever dream mashup of pop culture, history, and folklore from Nintendo.
They know I'm here.
Another platformer and a fantastic entry from Ubisoft here with Rayman Origins. First and foremost, UbiArt Framework has produced an absolute visual stunner again. Like, everything UbiArt Framework touches is gorgeous. Seriously, this is one of the best looking platformers on the 3DS, rivaling first-party releases from Nintendo. The gameplay is familiar, fast, and fluid, and everything just works. I'm a huge fan of Rayman Legends, and as great as that game is, it owes so much to what was established in Origins. Fun platforming, easy to pick up and play combat, gorgeous visuals, and incredible design work abound, all with a memorable soundtrack and memorable characters for you to meet and fight. It's honestly a nearly perfect game, and something that was a triumphant return for Rayman after having not starred in his own game since 2003. It's an incredibly fun game, and really that's one of the biggest issues with doing this video. There's so many really fun games on the 3DS. I didn't mention Fire Emblem, or Super Mario 3D World, or Project Cross Zone, or SteamWorld. Today, I wanted to talk to you guys about the Sega Dreamcast. It is one of my all-time favorite consoles, and it's something that I go back to all the time. Today, we are looking at the 10 Sega Dreamcast games that I keep coming back to.
Here they are, the most daredevil group of daffy drivers who ever whirled their wheels in the wacky races, competing for the title.
All right, I'm going to start off with probably a bit of a weird choice for most people, but it's based on one of my favorite cartoon properties from when I was a kid, and that's Wacky Races. As a fan of kart racing games, I really love that Wacky Races exists on the Dreamcast. Now, this is nothing like the Wacky Races on the NES. This isn't a platformer at all. This is a legit racing game. You get to choose one of the teams from the Wacky Races cartoons, and you go to the different environments, and you have objectives to complete as you race. It's so simple and straightforward and easy to pick up. Like, if you have ever played a kart racing game, you've got it. You know what to do. You get to choose from different weapons that are specific to your character that have different reactions in the game. The graphics look great. The controls are really good. Every car controls a little bit different. And it's just a lot of fun to play. Like, this is one that is kind of a crowd pleaser. It's not necessarily one of the best games on the Dreamcast, but it's something that if you have people that you know like kart racing games or like being able to play kind of casually competitive games, kind of like a Mario Kart, Wacky Races is the one you want to go with. It's a super fun game, and I think it looks great for what it is. I really enjoy this one. I think Wacky Races is a lot of fun.
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
It's really hard to talk about the Dreamcast and not talk about some of the absolutely incredible arcade ports that came to the console, and one of the first ones that comes to mind for me is Crazy Taxi and Crazy Taxi 2. Now, Crazy Taxi 2 is the game I'm talking about here today because I think it does take a step beyond what was originally set out in the initial Crazy Taxi game. A few improvements added to it. You get an entirely new environment to drive around in. You're in New York City now. You actually have 8 drivers to choose from instead of 4. You can choose between the Big Apple and the Small Apple, which I think is adorable. And you're able to pick up multiple passengers now as opposed to just one at a time. And while this is a truly simplistic game and straightforward in its delivery, one of the things I really appreciate about it is the fact that it's just fun. You can't deny that it's a good time to play Crazy Taxi unless you hate racing games, and even then I'd probably argue against that because this isn't even really a racing game. You're not competing against anybody other than the clock. And in a lot of cases with arcade ports to home consoles, one of the things I like to see changed is kind of the strict adherence to arcade rules. Like, I don't necessarily need to have the experience of needing to pump quarters into a machine in order to play it and have fun, because I would rather just be able to keep playing. But the beautiful simplicity of Crazy Taxi is you need to have that experience where you're running out of time and you're constantly going against the clock, because otherwise the game would be boring. It's a fantastic game. It's fun. It's over the top. It has a killer soundtrack, and I love it. It's the game I go back to all the time.
Versus Voldo.
fight!
Arena fighters, to me, were never my preferred style of game. I always preferred 2D, just plainer fighters like King of Fighters or Street Fighter. And I wasn't really sold on what Soul Calibur was offering the first time I experienced it. It looked great, don't get me wrong, it was gorgeous to look at, but I didn't think I was going to be able to fall into this 3D arena fighter and just be as head over heels with it as I am. Because games like Battle Arena Toshinden and Tekken that had come out before, while they were enjoyable, they weren't my preferred style. But Soul Calibur changed all of that. We had incredible character designs, fantastic weapons implementation, simplistic to play but hard to master gameplay mechanics, and just a wonderful, fast, exciting combat experience that I think a lot of games lack when they're trying to go for this kind of arena combat motif. It's something where you can just immediately knock someone out of the ring and win, or you can wear them down through normal attacking and kind of more standard fighting game strategies. It looks incredible to this day. This might be the best looking game on the Sega Dreamcast. And it's just a dream to play. I have so much fun playing this one, and I go back to it all the time because of how great the characters are and how great the combat is. Soul Calibur is nearly perfect. One of the things the Dreamcast did better than a lot of consoles at the time was embrace the shooter genre. And Gunbird 2 is probably my favorite. This game is just brilliant in its design. So first off, it's a cute 'em up. It's adorable. There's really fun characters to play as here, and it just controls beautifully well on the Sega Dreamcast. One of the things I really like about this is honestly, this is Psycho at their best as far as I'm concerned. This was the first game to introduce metal chaining. So when you defeat enemies, they're going to drop medals, and where you pick them up depends on how many points you get to them, and it really all reflects on how they look on the screen. So when they're at their brightest, they're going to be worth the most. When they're at their dullest, when they're rotating and turned sideways, they're going to be worth their least. And I think that's an incredibly clever second addition to the game that a lot of people kind of overlook and ignore. Because this is a game and a genre where you're always chasing high scores, being able to make sure that you're grabbing those medals where they're going to give you the most bonus points is imperative to chasing that high score. It's a truly fun game with a wonderful style and a great sense of humor. I love Gunbird 2. If you like bullet hell shoot 'em ups, this one needs to be on your radar. I have spoken regularly about my love of Power Stone on this channel, so I'll be brief on this one, but when I first played Power Stone, it was in Rocky's Replay Arcade in Orlando, Florida, and being able to get the original Power Stone experience, the almost arcade perfect experience on my Dreamcast at home, absolutely blew my mind. This is when I first realized that arcade ports could be 100% legit what I had experienced by plunking down quarters in the arcade. This is such an exciting game, and I wish this was an IP that Capcom gave a damn about, because unfortunately it's dead. There was a lot of that on the Dreamcast, actually. A lot of Capcom intellectual properties went to the Dreamcast to die. And I really feel like if this were released today, even if this was released was just an HD upgrade, just an upscale, just kind of a remaster, if we were to get a Power Stone and Power Stone 2 remastered today, I think they would be huge hits and something that folks would just absolutely love. This has a great roster, wonderful graphics, fantastic gameplay experience, amazing vocals, wonderful music. It doesn't miss. Power Stone is one of my favorite fighters of all time and an underappreciated classic on the Dreamcast.
Hey there, Space Cats! Ooh la la here, coming at you from Spaceport 9. Tonight I'm investigating reports that aliens have invaded...
This is a game that grabbed me the second I saw it. I loved the look of Space Channel 5, the design of Ooh La La, the design of the enemies in the game, the design of the characters in the space station as you're going around. The thought of doing a news broadcast via dance and rhythm was just so ridiculously appealing to me, and when I got this game, this was actually the first Sega Dreamcast game that I ever purchased with Space Channel 5, because I so badly wanted to play this, and it didn't disappoint when I got it into the Dreamcast. It's a game that kind of sparked my love of rhythm titles to this day. Space Channel 5, Samba de Amigo, Taiko Drum Master on the PS2, Donkey Konga with the bongos on the GameCube, those were all responsible for games that continue to be obsessions to this day. Games like Rock Band, games like Guitar Hero, the Taiko Drum Master games that are still being released on the Switch, games like that I just owe all back to my adoration of Space Channel 5. The design of the game is great, the music in the game is fantastic, it's simple to understand. It's kind of like a really fun game of Simon because you don't get direct cues on when you need to press the buttons. You have to listen for the rhythm. And it's really fun. Like, I just can't get over how easy it is to pick up and play this game, even after you haven't played it in years or you've never played it before. It's something that you can fall into almost immediately.
It's the preseason, football fans. Time to take off that suntan lotion and put on that...
There's just something about the 2K sports games on the Dreamcast that I really felt were significantly stronger than the offerings we were getting from Electronic Arts at the time. And my favorite of them, despite the fact that I am not a massive football fan and I'm a significantly bigger hockey fan, was NFL 2K2. I loved the gameplay in this game. I liked that it felt fast. It felt energetic. It felt more like what I would want to see football games to be like. Like, things just felt like they were moving at a more rapid pace than what I got in a typical NFL game, and significantly faster than what I ever experienced playing Madden. I thought the game looked great for what it was at the time, and the controls and the experience playing the game were incredibly positive. The game was logically produced. It played like you want an arcadey football game to play, but it wasn't necessarily like an NFL Blitz or anything like that, or an NFL Arcade from EA. It was just a faster, looser, more accessible, exciting NFL game. I played this a lot with my friend Rich when we would get together before Friday Night Fights back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was something where we really bonded together and we really enjoyed our times playing these games together. And it's something that I still go back to today. It doesn't really hold a candle now to games like, even something that released a few years later like Madden 04 or the current day experiences we're getting from the Madden series, but for its time, there wasn't anything better than NFL 2K2, and I really feel like gamers as a whole are getting a disservice from the NFL by only having one option out there, and that being the John Madden game. I think that both companies were at their best when they were pushing each other to innovate and to try to create something bigger than what they had created before. While so many people went to the Dreamcast for action games or for exciting fighting games or even sports experiences, one of the best games released on the console and one of my all-time favorite JRPGs is Skies of Arcadia. This is such an underrated classic, and I know, okay, maybe underrated isn't the right word, because I know a lot of people know this game, know how desirable it is, but I think they look at it from a collector's perspective because it is an incredibly valuable game on both the Dreamcast and the GameCube for its re-release there. But from an actual gameplay experience and from a story perspective, I would challenge you to find more engrossing and more exciting games than Skies of Arcadia. You play as Vyse and you're able to put together a party of up to 4 characters, and each character has a distinct persona, incredible abilities, a great look, a wonderful design, and the combat is so simple and straightforward that you're just familiar and you fall into it. It's all turn-based, it's all easy to understand and easy to grasp, and just a blast to play. I think this is one of the better-looking JRPGs of its era when you consider the fact that this came out only a couple of years after Final Fantasy VII, and you look at how far advanced the graphical quality is on Skies of Arcadia as compared to FF7. It's night and day. The gameplay in this is one of my favorite JRPG experiences ever. I think it has an incredibly solid, just straightforward and simple design aesthetic that people are going to cling to. And the story is so easy to fall into and just enjoy that you can't really help but be hooked on Skies of Arcadia if you're an RPG fan. I love this game. It's something that I've played repeatedly. I wish I had the GameCube version to go along with the Dreamcast version, but it's one of the best games of all time, one of my absolute favorite games released of the era, and one of the best games in the history of the Sega Dreamcast. Jet Grind Radio is so good. This is legitimately probably my favorite Dreamcast game that isn't a fighting game. I have put just so many hours into this game between this release on the Dreamcast, between Jet Set Radio Future on the Xbox. It's just a series and a concept that I love. The controls in the game are spectacular. You are on magnetic-powered rollerblades, and you're going around the town of Tokyo-to, and you're tagging things with your graffiti, and you tag graffiti by pulling the left trigger and then doing button inputs with the analog stick if necessary for larger tagging objects. And, like, all that just sounds, kind of blasé. It doesn't really sound terribly exciting, but when you toss in the fact that it plays like an arcade experience because there's a timer going on, the over-the-top presentation of everything that's going on, the beautiful cel-shaded graphics, fantastic voice acting, like, this is kind of the total package as far as I'm concerned. There's so many great aspects of this title, from the physics of the skating to the different design work that goes into the tags that are in the game, to the music, to the narrator. It's just a wonderful experience and something that when I discovered it and I started playing it, it almost immediately became my favorite Sega Dreamcast game. Jet Grind Radio is miles beyond so many other games and miles beyond things that we're even playing to this day. Like, I would love to see a new Jet Grind Radio set with dual analog controls because I think, man, that would just be just an incredible experience, especially with today's hardware. The looks and the graphical fidelity we would get from something like the Series X or the PS5 would be amazing. This is kind of the landmark gaming experience for me on the Sega Dreamcast. I know for a lot of folks, they identify really closely with Sonic Adventure. For some folks, they identify really closely with Shenmue. For me, the first game that I think of when I consider the Sega Dreamcast is Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This was my favorite arcade game. And when it was shown that we were going to be getting a home port of it, I couldn't imagine how they were going to make this something that was better than what I experienced in the arcade. And I don't necessarily think it's better, I think it's just a little bit different to make it more accessible for home consoles. The gameplay is spectacular. The character designs are great, backgrounds are wonderful, music is fantastic, but where the game really triumphs is how it unlocks things in the game to me. Being able to go into the store and purchase characters based on your performance in-game and what points you have acquired is huge. But the roster in the game, the absolutely massive list of characters that you're able to play with on both the Capcom and the Marvel side is magnificent. This introduced us to characters in the West that we had never heard of before from the Capcom side, and it brought forth some really obscure Marvel characters to make them as playable characters in the game. Like, who really thought we were ever going to be able to play as Marrow in a Marvel game? That's super cool. I love Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This is probably my most consistently played Dreamcast game. It's something that I used to play in Friday Night Fights. It's something that I still play to this day. It is my all-time favorite fighting game. There are so many positive memories wrapped up in this, and it's something that continues to play just brilliantly and beautifully well to this day.
Today I wanted to go back to my games I keep coming back to series, specifically today talking about one of my favorite all-time handhelds, the Gameboy Advance. There are so many incredible games on this platform, and up first we have one of my all-time favorites, Advance Wars.
When I stop and I think about the Game Boy Advance, one of the genres that really solidified itself as one of my favorites to play were tactical strategy games. And while there were a ton of excellent options on the Game Boy Advance, none for me stood taller than Advance Wars. Advance Wars puts you in charge of the Orange Star Army on a quest to defend your homeland against your nation's longtime antagonists, the Blue Moon Nation, eventually as well as against the armies of Green Earth and Yellow Comet. While Advance Wars is a game that has its tongue firmly planted in its cheek, it nonetheless offers some absolutely incredible gameplay options, with a deep environmental defensive system that's a part of every level you play on, an ever-changing and player-alterable economic system that allows you to gain new troops as you make more money depending on what cities you've occupied, supply chain simulation causing your troops to need to return to base or to APCs to resupply their ammunition and fuel, and all-terrain combat on land, sea, and air. And if that was all the game offered, it would be plenty, because the gameplay on this title is king. But I'd argue that what makes Advance Wars so truly memorable are its incredible cast of characters. There's Andy, the plucky upstart CO who is the unlikely linchpin for the entire worldwide conflict in the game, Max, the straightforward and upfront combat expert, Sammy, the infantry expert, and all the opposing army COs. It's truly a masterpiece of a title, with easy to pick up and understand gameplay mechanics, but truly challenging aspects to master as you face a variety of troops, vehicles, and CO strengths and weaknesses in your ever-evolving worldwide war. It's legitimately one of my favorite games of all time, and something I've come back to countless times over the years. Kind of like our next game on the list, one of the single greatest role-playing games of all time. There are few RPGs more suited to the portability of the Game Boy Advance than Golden Sun, which is especially ironic as it began life conceptualized as a title for the Nintendo 64. Developed by Camelot Software, Golden Sun puts you in control of Isaac, Garrett, Ivan, and Mia, 4 teenage magic adepts who rose to magical prominence after a tragic storm was caused by the game's protagonists, triggering the magical trap in Mount Aleph. With a signature Camelot-style visual identity that feels familiar enough to those that have played the Shining 4 series, the game decisively makes its own mark by diving headlong into RPG gameplay and a magical fantasy world. Rather than leaning into Camelot's roots by making the game a tactical strategy game, they instead relied on random monster encounters and a deep magical system based around 4 elemental powers. Venus grants control of rocks and plants, Mars grants control over fire and heat, Jupiter grants wind and electricity, and Mercury grants water and ice. And while these elements allow for a traditional combat usage, one of the things that Golden Sun does remarkably well, it ties all those magical abilities into environmental manipulation as well. Spells you learn in the game will allow you the ability to return to different areas and cast a particular spell to grant access to a previously blocked part of the environment, allowing for a balanced and logical return to areas you'd previously explored, effectively disguising the grind inherent to so many JRPGs of the time. It, sadly, is a series that has fallen dormant after 4 fantastic adventures between the GBA and DS, and one I truly wish that Nintendo would remaster or revisit on modern hardware. I really think this would do incredibly well on the Switch. Kind of like what they did for our next game on the list, bumping it up from the NES to probably its perfect version on the Game Boy Advance.
Super Mario Brothers 3!
There really isn't a whole hell of a lot that one needs to say about Super Mario Advance 4 Super Mario Bros. 3. Take what is arguably the best adventure from Mario for the NES, use the updated visual engine from the Super Mario All-Stars port on the SNES, add in Mario Brothers as a menu option, put in the voice of Charles Martinet, and embrace the truly wackadoo nature of what is decidedly Nintendo by incorporating the Nintendo e-reader to expand the game by adding bonus stages, and you've effectively offered the single best version of Super Mario Bros. 3 there is. If you're somehow not aware of how important Super Mario Bros. 3 is, you're still feeling its effects some 30 plus years after its initial release. Wide-ranging power-ups beyond just mushrooms and fire flowers? That was Mario 3. A world map to explore, to choose your path through a level, or to find power-ups or bonus stages? Super Mario Bros. 3. Creative bosses that eschew just using Bowser at the end of every level and incorporated the Koopalings? SMB 3. Boo houses, auto-scrolling levels, chain chomps, dry bones, picking up Koopa shells, sliding down a hill, airships, jumping on a boss's head 3 times to defeat them? All of that started in Super Mario Bros. 3, and all are things we are still experiencing in Mario games to this day. While Super Mario Bros. 2 is my personal favorite, there is no denying how ridiculously important Super Mario Bros. 3 is, and how ridiculously influential it was on not only the Mario franchise as a whole, but far and away was a megaton bomb with its impact on the gaming industry. To call it only one of the best GBA games of all time would be a disservice. Super Mario Bros. 3 is one of the best games of all time, period, across every console generation. Oh, and before we move on to our next game on the list, one last secret influence. This sound for the warp whistle? Yeah, that's an Ocarina of Time. Seriously, check this out. And while Ocarina wasn't on the GBA, we sure did get an incredible Zelda adventure. It's just a bit on the small scale. I truly wish we still lived in the timeline where Capcom had carte blanche to make incredibly innovative Zelda games like we had back on the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. This isn't really nostalgia talking. I played the Minish Cap briefly upon its initial release, but my main exposure to the game came a decade plus later when it was released as a title on the Wii U Virtual Console. Taking the signature gameplay experiences out of the equation, yes, you have a top-down view, yes, you explore Hyrule, and yes, you get additional items to help you on your quest as you fight through dungeons. Where Minish Cap really excels is when it leans into the MacGuffin of the game, the Minish Cap itself. A talking hat named Eslo. Okay, well, Eslo used to be a Minish sage, but he got turned into a hat by the big bad guy of this game, Vaati. It's a whole thing. And Eslo granted Link the ability to transform from his normal size into the size of the Minish using portals throughout Hyrule, opening up exploration and puzzle-solving opportunities. And while the MacGuffin is great, where Minish Cap truly excels is by leaning heavily into the hardware capabilities that the crazy creative minds from Capcom and Flagship utilized to make some of the most memorable and exciting dungeons since A Link to the Past. Not to be forgotten either is that Minish Cap tied directly into the Four Swords games. While it dropped after Four Swords Adventures on the GameCube, Minish Cap actually embraced the rather fluid nature of the Zelda timeline and told the origin story of the Four Sword weapon and Vaati, making it the opening story in the Four Swords trilogy of games. It's a truly incredible adventure worthy of the Zelda mantle, and Minish Cap is an imaginative and exciting adventure that embraces its roots, but also wasn't afraid to make its own indelible mark on the legacy of Zelda overall. Much like our next game, a tactical strategy masterpiece. I am forever indebted to Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, as it was my introduction into the Fire Emblem universe, outside of like Roy and Marth and Smash Brothers. I had previously played Advance Wars and Advance Wars 2, and I was eager to get more turn-based tactical strategy games on my GBA, and while there was no shortage of them on the console, few were as well polished and impactful as Fire Emblem. And while I missed out on the original GBA release here in the States, Sacred Stones was something I lucked into, scoring it for under $5. There was a magical Kmart in Oviedo, Florida that my friend Corey and I used to go to frequently, and their Game Boy Advance games were almost always on sale for deep discount. And one day I got lucky and found Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Eager to play it, I was immediately whisked away to a fantastical fantasy world with the same familiar tactical strategy I had grown to adore from Advance Wars, but this time involving amazing knights, dragons, and magical creatures. And this also introduced me to the concept of weapon degradation in strategy games, something we still experience in Fire Emblem games today. Resupplying your armies meant going to shops and outfitting their kit in between battles, as well as changing classes and learning new jobs to advance their capabilities. It was and is a joy to experience, and is still one of the benchmark games I use to measure strategy games against, because it just got so much perfectly right. And while by today's standards it's a bit clunky and kind of muffs a few aspects that were later perfected in subsequent titles, it's still something I love and consider one of the best games in the series. A fitting second entry to the franchise on the GBA. Kind of like our next title. I think taking a major risk in reimagining your initial game in a franchise is a bold approach, and one that can frequently blow up in your face, but Nintendo R&D 1 did something truly magical with the brilliant Metroid Zero mission. It captured the sense of exploration and wonder the original NES game provided, cleaned it up considerably, and took that story arc of who Samus was as a character and turned it completely on its head. Zero Mission tells the basic story arc of the first Metroid game. You land on Zebes, you explore the planet, fight Ridley and Kraid, take out Mother Brain, but then Zero Mission adds expanded gameplay options, multiple quality of life improvements, and a killer graphical overhaul that improves everything about the original release. There's also areas in Zero Mission not present in the original game, as well as numerous gameplay modes that unlock as you beat the game under different circumstances. I think the chief complaint that most people could have about Zero Mission is that it's a little short, but I think that's why it's such a perfect handheld game. By having all the different save options throughout the game as you're playing, you're able to kind of pick it up and play it for 5 minutes, save, and then go about your business. It's an excellent version of an adventure game on a handheld console. While Zero Mission added just a bit to an original concept, our next game completely altered a familiar gameplay aesthetic and made something new and unique for a familiar gaming mascot. I remember when I first played the Mega Man Battle Network series, I was pretty convinced I was going to hate the game because how dare Capcom alter what I felt was gospel gameplay elements from Mega Man. 2D platforming, that was all I wanted. And yeah, we're going to conveniently ignore the fact that at the time I loved and still love to play the Mega Man Legends and Tron Bonne games, so popping into Battle Network I was, to say the least, skeptical of what it could be. And to say I was blown away was an understatement. Here was this absolutely gorgeous game featuring just familiar enough versions of characters I was familiar with, blending a card battling system with tactical action gameplay and strategy and land grab elements. I was absolutely floored with how incredible this game was, and the gameplay experience to this day is some of my absolute favorite on the Game Boy Advance. Everything about this game I enjoyed, from the memorable characters, creative usage of the Mega Man IP, to offer something completely new and different from what we'd experienced before, to exciting gameplay. Everything in Mega Man Battle Network not only hit, it absolutely stuck the landing for a perfect 10 experience, at least in my eyes. And truth be told, this game is a stand-in for the entire franchise. I've loved each and every entry that I've played, up to and including the GameCube release that blends platforming elements with the characters we're familiar with from the Battle Network franchise. I'm truly so stupidly excited that we're getting a Battle Network Legacy Collection released next year, as there's so much that this series offers that I truly believe most people would enjoy this franchise. And seriously, kudos and applause to Capcom for utilizing their familiar IP to offer something completely new and unique, much like our next entry from Nintendo. Mario makes a return to the list, and this time he's bringing the big ape Donkey Kong with him. Mario vs. Donkey Kong is one of those games that cleverly expands upon something that was previously offered generations prior on the original Game Boy. If you ever played Donkey Kong on the OG cream spinach Game Boy, you know that after you run through the normal Donkey Kong levels we're all familiar with, the game completely opened up and added creative puzzle platforming environments for you to work your way through. And Mario vs. Donkey Kong takes that concept and perfects it, adding special maneuvers, creative puzzles, and brilliant level designs for you to work your way through as everyone's favorite Italian plumber, or I guess in this game, everyone's favorite Italian toy maker like Geppetto. Gameplay tasks you with making your way through multiple levels where you need to collect presents and keys to collect Mini Mario toys, followed by levels where you need to guide the different Mini Marios through a level to reach a toy box, creative and challenging boss fights against Donkey Kong, who is back in his original villainous role, well, sort of, he just wanted toys, and finally, plus and expert difficulty levels which unlock, offering even more challenging puzzle-solving tasks for you to complete. It's such a refreshing take on a familiar character and gameplay concept, but it succeeds so effortlessly because nothing in the game feels unnatural or forced. Your athletic moves that Mario can pull off feel like they stepped out of a traditional Mario platformer, so everything just kind of clicks into place. And when you fail, it's never in a case of frustration. It dances just along that line, and it's one of those puzzle games where just one more stage is readily apparent. It's a beautiful and fun title that expands upon a classic concept, but honestly, sometimes you don't really need to expand on an idea. Sometimes you just need to lean into what works, like our next game. Purchased at the same mystical Kmart that I got Fire Emblem at, Capcom Classics Mini Mix is a compilation title featuring 3 classic Capcom games from the NES: Strider, Bionic Commando, and most tantalizingly, Mighty Final Fight. Collectors will know that acquiring Mighty Final Fight on its NES cartridge original release is a foolhardy exercise, as a loose copy will regularly cost you over $250 today. But with Mini Mix, you can get those 3 classic games for $25 complete in box on the GBA. Gameplay is fun and varied. Strider tells the story of Strider Hiryu, with gameplay identical to the original NES release. You'll travel to a variety of levels, find data and information to help your mission, all while figuring out an ever-expanding plot of betrayal and espionage. Bionic Commando puts you in everyone's favorite grappling hook arm, allowing you to explore a wide variety of levels and fight against challenging enemies. And of course, Mighty Final Fight gives you an incredible beat-em-up experience that's a love letter to the original Final Fight, but 100% uses that reverence for the source material to make a truly enjoyable chibi battler that few games on the NES can stand up to. It's a magnificent collection and one that truly embraces the nostalgia and roots of the original 3 games in this collection. Our last game on the list embraces its roots as well, but does so by plussing the original experience in numerous ways. Starting with tactical strategy and ending with tactical strategy, the Game Boy Advance was truly the console that made me love that genre. And while the Shining Force series is something that I've long enjoyed, I only briefly played the originals on the Genesis and didn't really love the series until I played the remake, Resurrection of the Dark Dragon, on the GBA. With a gorgeous visual presentation and some subtle pluses to the original gameplay, like a ramping difficulty, added story aspects, new characters, and quality of life improvements that allow you to better strategize as you play. Everything the original did well, from its vast storyline to memorable characters, is done here as well. It's just done better. I've enjoyed the originals, and it's truly a landmark franchise where you can really see why Camelot was so coveted by Nintendo to become a trusted developer for their in-house franchises, like the aforementioned Golden Sun series, as well as the Mario Golf and Mario Tennis series. Shining Force, though, is a phenomenal tactical strategy game with memorable characters and a massive world to explore, and it does so much to improve upon games in the genre that were released at the time. Playing Shining Force is an exciting and fun experience, whereas games like the original Fire Emblem on the Famicom is significantly more methodical in its approach and can be perceived as kind of boring or dull. Shining Force is an incredible franchise, starting all the way back in the early 90s and continuing through to today with new releases. But if you want to see where the tactical strategy aspect of the series all began, Resurrection of the Dark Dragon is a great place to do that.
With a mix of fantastic new releases and classic games on the service, Xbox Game Pass is, in my opinion, the best value in gaming right now. What's going on, everyone? I'm Jay. Welcome to Square Pegs. Today, we're heading over to Game Pass, and I am showing you 10 games that you need to be playing right now.
So I talked about this a couple of days ago when I did my COVID video, but Vampire Survivors to me is one of the best games of the year because it is such a simple concept that executes almost effortlessly, but it does so with such deep attention to detail that I didn't expect. So when I first booted this game up, it's very, very simple. You just move around, you have an attack that happens, and you have wave after wave of enemies that are coming at you, and you have to survive as long as you possibly can. And where the game gets really complex is when it introduces its meta, because you have different power-ups you're able to collect, and those power-ups will pair with other power-ups to become even more powerful to create different synergies, and then you have different unlockables and different bonuses that you're able to purchase and things like that. There's a ton of different levels and relics that you're able to find, so the depth of Vampire Survivors is massive. Like, it is so much deeper than I anticipated, and it's something that I've just absolutely fallen in love with, and I think everyone needs to give this one a shot because of how deep and how wonderful a game it is. But maybe you're not into games like this. Maybe you want something that's a little bit more involved. Like maybe you're looking for something that was exclusive to the PlayStation 5. And of course, one of the first dominoes to fall in the Bethesda acquisition from Microsoft was games that were exclusive to the PlayStation 5 coming over to the Xbox, and the one I want to talk about right now is Deathloop. Now, I own this on the PS5, but it's something that I have never booted up on the console, and it's not really a thing that is because of the PS5, it's just because the Xbox is the one I gravitate towards. You play as Colt, you're an assassin that's stuck in a time loop, and your job is to take out different targets, 8 different targets throughout the game, to break the loop. And the game is so interesting and intriguing and deeply immersive. Like, as you play, Colt is starting to recall different things as he's playing, and he's starting to remember things, and you're going to be notified when something changes from a previous run-through. Like, there's a point in the game where Colt actually apologizes for a situation, and the person he's talking to, Juliana, comments that he's never done that before, so the loop is starting to break. The gameplay is really straightforward. It's a fantastic first-person shooter. You're able to pick up different melee items as well, and you have a hack-a-majig, which is just like the greatest item name ever, that you're going to use to hack different objects throughout the game. I love games like this that take place in kind of an alternate future, or in this case, an alternate past of the 1960s, and it's one of the most interesting and intriguing games that I've played in a long time. I don't typically get into first-person shooters, so I didn't expect for this one to land nearly as much as it has for me, but the style and the design of the game and what goes into it have really made me a fan of it. Deathloop is absolutely fantastic. But there's so many different games on the Game Pass service that while we have something brand new here with Deathloop, I want to take it back to the original Xbox and play a classic, one of my all-time faves. And that all-time favorite is, of course, Crimson Skies. This is a game that I didn't expect to like nearly as much as I did. When I bought my original Xbox, it was with the express purpose to play Knights of the Old Republic. And when I got my time in on that one, I started branching out a little bit. I tried a bunch of different games. And one I was told to try repeatedly was Crimson Skies, and I never really did until probably about 2 years later. I finally found it for sale for like $5, and I picked it up. And I immediately fell head over heels in love with the game because it is such a wonderful mix of kind of a steampunk aesthetic and this amazing dogfight shooter that I couldn't help but love it. The style and substance of the game is top-notch. It still looks great today, some 20 years after it was originally released, and it's still a ton of fun. Like, there's been upscaling done on the Series X version for Game Pass, so that's a nice addendum to the game, so I really do like that. But if you are a fan of dogfight shooters, if you're a fan of airplane games, Crimson Skies needs to be on your list because of just how much it does with the source material and how amazing the steampunk aesthetic is. But maybe you're not into games like that. Maybe the shooters or flying games aren't really your thing and you're into beat-em-ups. I want to show you one that I had never heard of that just recently got added. And that new beat-em-up is called, and I apologize if I butcher the pronunciation here, The Legend of Tian Ding. This is such a fun game and such a neat presentation style. So first off, it's presented like it's a comic book. So there's panel breakdowns and things like that as you're going through to present the story. But when you get into game, it is just a really straightforward, solid beat 'em up. The gameplay is solid. The design is good. The voice acting is spectacular and abundant. There is a ton of voice acting in this game. And there's all kinds of neat traversal and attack mechanics in this game. Like, you're able to use your belt as you knock someone up in the air to grab their weapon from them to equip that weapon on your person. So you're able to get things like guns and axes as opposed to just your standard dagger that you fight with. It's a really cleverly designed game and something that has a very deep combat mechanic in it that I'm thoroughly enjoying. It is one of my favorite games that I have played on the Xbox Game Pass service. That also includes this next game, one of the best sports titles of the year.
Instead of it being a solo shot, it's a 2 or 3 run homer.
In the air, left field.
MLB The Show 22 is something I've talked about numerous times on the channel in the past, so this might be a little bit more brief. But I want to point out how great of a game this is. So, first off, this is one of the first times it's been available on the Xbox. We did have The Show 21 last year, but 22 is pretty much a step up in every single regard. The gameplay mechanics are some of the best of any baseball game I have ever played since I was a child. The stadium designs are fantastic. There is a deep create-a-player mode that you're able to go through with Road to the Show, and a fantastic presentation style where you're going to have different broadcasters talking about your character as you play. But the main attraction to me is exhibition. As much as I love Road to the Show, the exhibition games are fantastic. You're able to play as every single player in the game, every different position that you want, and it is just truly an enjoyable experience. This is one of the best sports games of the year for any sport, period. It's just fantastic. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, why don't you hit that subscribe button down below? I talk a lot about the Switch, the Xbox, PlayStation, and all kinds of retro stuff. But let's get back to it now. Moving on now to one of my favorite releases of the year, and that is TMNT Shredder's Revenge. This was, without question, my most anticipated game of the year. The Ninja Turtle beat-em-up games from classic arcades and on classic 16-bit consoles are some of my signature gameplay memories, like core gameplay memories for me, that are just so important and things that I absolutely adore and think are incredible. And this .mu and Tribute Games delivered one of the best gameplay experiences I've ever had. It is so good. It is so well put together and so well presented and so well designed that it feels like a natural inclusion in that fantastic history of Ninja Turtle beat-em-ups. Everything in this game works. Beautiful graphics, fantastic music, amazing voice acting, a solid challenge, but still something that is accessible and enjoyable, and brilliant multiplayer. This is easily one of my favorite games of the year. And so is this next one, a fantastic return to a classic adventure game series. When it was announced that Return to Monkey Island was releasing this year, on April 1st, I was fully committed to the fact that this was not real. There was no way this was going to happen. We were not going to be getting a brand new Monkey Island game. It just would not occur. But when the dust settled and we found out that not only were we getting a brand new Monkey Island game, but it was the first Monkey Island game from Ron Gilbert since Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge in 1991, and it was going to be published by Devolver Digital, and it was going to be a return to form with incredible graphics and the fantastic voice acting, including Dominic Armato as Guybrush Threepwood, I was 100% in. And everything about this game works. I am not going to spoil much of the plot just because I think if you are a fan at all of the Monkey Island series, you need to enjoy this for yourself and experience it all yourself. because I think it's that important. This is just such an amazing thing to get in 2022 that I can't really express enough how spoiled we are to have this happen. It was such a treat to get Return to Monkey Island that I can't express how much I enjoyed it. And it was a surprise to even receive it in the first place. Kind of like this next game. The most Zelda game I have played since A Link Between Worlds.
For a couple of hungry kids.
Tunic was something that I wasn't prepared for. I had been told that it was coming out. I had been told it was going to be a great game, that it had inspirations from Zelda, but I didn't expect for this game to be this encompassing and to not really be inspired by Zelda so much as it is the mirror universe version of Zelda. Like, this is kind of the Dark World version of Zelda from A Link to the Past, because everyone's an animal. It's just a magical game. It is a top-down kind of three-quarter isometric view Zelda game, and the gameplay is brilliant. You're able to find different items, you're able to explore and find keys to unlock different rooms, you're able to fight enemies, there's even like Z-targeting in the game when you hold down the left trigger. It's just a magical experience, and it's such a breath of fresh air and kind of a classic throwback to signature Zelda gameplay from the 90s. I love Tunic. It's been an absolute incredible experience to play, and it's something that I look forward to playing when I boot up my Xbox now. And whilst Tunic is kind of a spiritual descendant of The Legend of Zelda, this next one is a straight up sequel to one of my favorite roguelites of all time. I don't typically like being frustrated when I play a video game. Like, I'm not into the Souls games. They don't work for me. I don't like being angry when I play. I want to calm down and relax and enjoy my gameplay experience, which doesn't explain why I love Spelunky so much. It is one of the most frustrating video games I've ever played. It is unbelievably difficult. I've never beaten it. I will never beat it. And that's usually sign enough for me to not go after a sequel, but Spelunky 2 called to me like a siren song, and I immediately downloaded it, I immediately booted it up, and I was immediately awful at it, because it's the sequel to Spelunky. Of course it's just as difficult, if not more so. But it is such a wonderful gameplay experience that I don't get mad playing it. It's one of those ones where it's like, just one more run, just one more run, just one more run. I want to keep playing it. I want to keep going back into the caves, and I want to keep fighting my way through to try to beat the game. It's an absolutely brilliant experience. It is a simple and easy to pick up and play game with an unbelievably steep learning curve to master. And I don't know that anyone ever has, because it's that hard. The last game on this list is a game that I think went under a lot of people's radars this year, and it is a big ticket AAA title featuring classic Marvel comic book characters. I realize that I'm in the minority for the Avengers game that came out a couple of years ago and actually enjoying that one, but I can also see the flaws inherent in the design. There was a lot of stuff in there that just did not work. I enjoyed the single-player experience, but the multiplayer just wasn't very good. So when Square announced that they were making a Guardians of the Galaxy game, and it was going to be decidedly single-player, I was encouraged, but it kind of bummed me out that you were only going to play as Star-Lord, because of all the Guardians, he's probably the least interesting. So I had a little bit of trepidation when this game released. I didn't expect to enjoy it, and it's something that I played and immediately put the controller down and said, oh my god, they've got something incredibly special here. The gameplay is just a blast. When you get into the action sequences of the game, it's a ton of fun to play. It's very easy to pick up and play, but where the game really flexes its muscles is with the dialogue and the voice acting. And one of the most impressive things about the game is the fact that there are branching dialogue trees as you play, because there's different decisions you can make and different characters you can influence, and it's just brilliantly done. So playing as Star-Lord, you're cocky, you're kind of arrogant, but there's an innocence and kind of a sincerity to the character as well, which doesn't typically come across with portrayals like Chris Pratt does in the Guardians movies. But what happens in this game is you actually get kind of the nuance and the depth to the Star-Lord character, and I love it. I am absolutely head over heels in love with this game. It is just such a beautiful to look at game, and an absolutely fantastic to play game as well, if you can remember how to do QuickTime events, because I frequently forget that they're in there and then I screw them up repeatedly, but eventually it clicks. Guardians of the Galaxy is not only one of the best games on Game Pass, it's one of my favorite games of 2022.
Today we are looking at the 10 PlayStation 1 games I keep coming back to.
I will not.
You shall regret those words. We will meet again.
While Castlevania Symphony of the Night is not going to win any awards for the quality of its voice acting, everything else that this game does, it just crushes. It's so good. From a graphic perspective, this is one of the best looking Castlevania games ever released. From a gameplay perspective, it directly influenced probably the next 10 to 15 years of Castlevania releases, up to the point where we kind of got into the Lord of Shadows series. But still, without this game, we wouldn't call them Metroidvanias, because the Castlevania games before this weren't exploration-based. They were linear. You just proceeded through your levels. This one changed all of that. Now, Simon's Quest, sure, that was a little bit different, but that was more of an RPG than anything. Symphony of the Night, though, influenced directly where the franchise went and things that people still equate with quality gameplay to this day. You play as Alucard, you're going through the Castle Dracula to eliminate the threat of your father Dracula, and it's just a beautiful, wonderful, fantastic game, incorporating amazing exploration, fantastic combat, wonderful graphics, and some killer RPG elements that just make this game a perfect 10. And you know it wouldn't be a list for me without at least one sports title on here, and here we go. This is Hot Shots Golf 2, or Everybody's Golf if you're in other parts of the world. And to me, this game is just fantastic. It's one of the best golf games ever released. This, to me, is in the upper echelon of golfing games out there. This is as good as Mario Golf games. This is as good as things like the Tiger Woods series on the Wii. It's just a magical experience. Sony had lightning in a bottle with this, and we even were able to get this carried over onto the PlayStation 4 with Everybody's Golf VR, and it's wonderful there, too. This is just a fun game experience for me. Like, I had such a blast playing this when I first played it back in the 90s, and it's something that, even to this day, I love going back to and playing because it's just such a charming presentation and just such a truly fun game. Like I said, Hot Shots Golf 2 is one of the best golf games ever made as far as I'm concerned, and it's something that I just think a lot of people kind of overlooked because it's a sports game, but don't let it fool you. Hot Shots Golf 2 is worth playing. It takes a lot to see an advertisement and for it to hook me and make me want to play a game. But that is exactly what happened with Tomba. I love Tomba. This is an amazing game with a memorable character that has a distinct visual aesthetic. Like, not only is the character memorable by being a caveman with a bright pink cotton candy hairdo, it's also got this kind of neat claymation feel. Like, it's not exactly claymation, but it feels constructed rather than graphical as far as its presentation style. And the gameplay is incredible. It has like quests inside these different platform levels that you have to complete by going back and forth throughout the level to unlock things and to find different parts of the level to complete the different tasks that you have. It is one of the best games I've ever played. Like, this one to me, when I first saw it, I went, yeah, I need to play that game. And it is just a magical, wonderful experience. Tomba is amazing. If you have never had the opportunity to play it, you need to. It's that good. This is one of my favorite games ever made, one of my favorite games on the PS1, and just such a wonderful platforming experience that I wish more games took cues from.
Round one, fight!
Up to the point of the mid to late 90s, Capcom was pretty well known for doing 2D fighters. And when they dipped into the 3D fighter genre with Street Fighter EX plus Alpha, as well as this game here, Rival Schools United by Fate, to say the least, I was skeptical. But getting into game, Rival Schools just worked. The characters were fun, the storyline was over the top and frankly kind of dumb, but the gameplay was where it was at. It was a solid gameplay experience that did something a little bit different than other Capcom fighters at the time, and that's pretty cool in the grand scheme of things, because
It's real easy to fall into kind of the same traps and the same tropes that were present in Street Fighters and Darkstalkers, but we got something just a little bit different by putting that 3D element into play here with Rival Schools. There's fantastic characters, great combat, some over-the-top, silly, ridiculous storylines, but I personally think the game is wonderful, and I think it's a ton of fun. This is one I pop in pretty regularly when I have a little bit of time to play, and I just think it's a fantastic title. This and its sequel, Project Justice, are both magnificent. Rising Zan, the Samurai Gunman! This game is so stupid. Just utterly ridiculous. One of the dumbest games I have ever played. And I love everything about it. Rising Zan, the Samurai Gunman is such a terrible game. I'm not going to tell you it's brilliant. It's not. It's a great idea. It's an absolutely phenomenal idea, but it is executed horribly because the game is about 10 years ahead of its time. I have said for years, if Rising Zan, the Samurai Gunman released on the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 3, it would have been one of the biggest hits of that console generation. But given the limitations of the PS1, it's just kind of seen as this obscure, weird action game that not a lot of people have ever played. I remember when it released, it was something that I had my eyes on, and I actually found it at a movie gallery on sale in their used bin, and I bought it for $3, and I still have that copy to this day. The game alone is worth playing just to see the intro song because it is so over the top and so ridiculous. But the gameplay itself, it's still a fun game and still has a wickedly hilarious sense of humor that a lot of games don't have to this day. This was Devil May Cry before Devil May Cry was Devil May Cry. It is that good of a game. If you ever get the chance to play it, you won't, well, you probably will regret it. It's janky as hell, but I still love it to this day, and something I play at least once a year. I love snowboarding video games, and the first one I actually ever played wasn't 1080 Avalanche or anything like that. It was actually Cool Borders on the PS1. And my favorite in that series is Cool Borders 3. It doesn't really do anything groundbreaking or change the game in any way, shape, or form. It's just solidly made and really fun to play. I fell in love with snowboarding games because of the Cool Borders series, and it's something to this day I still enjoy playing. Everything from SSX all the way up to Riders Republic today are games that I enjoy. I mean, even Steep from Ubisoft I thought had a lot of promise. But it all started with Cool Borders for me. I love this series. I think it's truly fun. It's a little bit clunky in the grand scheme of things, but to me, it's something that I can still go back and play and enjoy, and I think more people need to recognize it for its influence on the industry overall, because personally to me, without games like 1080 Snowboarding or this series here with Cool Borders, we never would have gotten the SSX franchise. So it kills me that I used to own this game, and now I have to play it on an emulator because it's just so damn expensive. If you don't know what this game is, this is The Misadventures of Tronbon. This is one of my absolute favorite games released on the PlayStation 1, and like a lot of people, I got rid of a lot of my PS1 games when the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox launched. I traded all that stuff in so I can move on to the next generation, and I look back at it now and I realize the error of my ways because, I mean, this game is worth hundreds upon hundreds of dollars. And that stinks because I think a lot of people really need the opportunity to play it. Now you can, because there are digital options where you're able to play this game, or you can emulate it like I'm doing here. And it's just a wonderful experience because as much as I love the Mega Man Legends series, and this kind of is a stand-in for that whole franchise here, Misadventures of Tronbon to me is the best of the bunch because it mixes up the gameplay. It offers the most solid visual and gameplay aesthetic that the other ones don't have. You get puzzle solving, kind of like these Descent level games, and the standard 3D adventure platforming and exploration that you got with the regular Mega Man Legends games. And I just love this one. Tronbon's one of my favorite characters. I love playing as her in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I love her in this game. She's just a wonderful character. And this is a fantastic game. If you have an opportunity to play this on an emulator or to pick this up digitally on a digital storefront, do so. You won't regret it. While nowadays we're kind of spoiled for amazing tactical strategy games on a variety of consoles,
back in the era of the PS1, the main one we had was Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, we did have some other ones that released around the same time, but the most landmark of that bunch was, to me at least, Final Fantasy Tactics. It told an absolutely compelling story. You were in the shoes of Ramza, a wonderful character with fantastic supporting cast and memorable protagonists and antagonists that helped you or hindered you along the way. It's a remarkable title and something that I have gone back to very frequently over the years and something that I absolutely love. It is a deep and difficult game with a lot of grinding, but I think if you play this one, if you have any kind of affection for tactical strategy games at all, you'll be able to see through it and enjoy what the game offers, because the different jobs that you're able to get, the beautiful visuals, the fantastic music, and the just ridiculously compelling story that's involved in this game is amazing. It's something that I come back to all the time, and something that, to me, is nearly perfect in its execution. Even with all the grindy aspects that are in there, it's still, I think, one of the best games ever made. Final Fantasy Tactics is just wonderful.
Kick, boom, you remember. Chop, chop, back again, yes, forever. You have many challenges coming at ya.
When I talk about rhythm games on the PlayStation 1, almost everyone immediately goes to Parappa the Rapper, and rightfully so. It's a fantastic game. The sequel is also wonderful. But for me, the one that I absolutely fell head over heels for when I was younger was Jammer Lammy. I loved the music. I loved the characters. I just loved the presentation style of the game. And it's something that I played constantly. This was the first rhythm game I ever really got into. I had played Parappa before it and I enjoyed it, but this one kept me coming back for more. I love Jammer Lammy. I wish we had actually seen more sequels in this game series, because I just think that Lammy herself is wonderful, the music is fantastic, and the graphics in the game, while obviously directly influenced by Parappa, are unique and distinct enough that they offer their own look and feel to the franchise. I think this game is wonderful. If you haven't played it, I'm not going to tell you to do so now unless you have a PS1 hooked up to a CRT, just because the delays inherent in going to an HD TV make this game really unforgiving and really hard to play. As you can see, I'm performing terribly on these songs that I'm playing here, but it is still an absolutely wonderful game and something I truly adore and think a lot of people overlooked because of their love of Parappa. This is by far my favorite game of all time. As much as I love games like Final Fantasy VI or Super Mario Bros. 3, Suikoden 2 is the one that set the table and is the one that I come back to legitimately every year. I have played through this game every year since I bought it. It is my all-time favorite video game. It has some of the best characters, some of the most memorable gameplay, incredible visuals, a huge world to explore, a fantastic, deep, emotional, compelling storyline that you just want to throw yourself into, and kind of even a Pokemon aesthetic of gotta catch 'em all by trying to assemble the full 108 Stars of Destiny. It's such an important game to me that when people ask me what my favorite game is, I can say without hesitation that it is Suikoden 2, because all of the characters in the game just mean more to me than anything else. I cannot wait for the HD remasters of Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2 to release, because I think that the world needs the opportunity to play these more than they have had, because for as long as I have known about these games, they have been difficult to find. Even when they were new releases, they were hard to find, and they've only gone up in value since. Suikoden 2, like I said, it is my all-time favorite game. On any list, this would be the number one game that I keep coming back to.
Do you know what one of my favorite sounds is? That one right there. Absolutely one of my favorite sounds in all of video games is the Game Boy startup sound. And I wanted to take the opportunity today to talk to you guys about the Game Boy, one of my favorite consoles of all time, something that I used to play constantly. In fact, when I got my Game Boy in 1989, it actually got more regular play than my NES did. Today, we are looking at 10 games on the Game Boy that I am still playing in 2023, and we are kicking things off with a tomato.
Okay, I promise we are going to talk about the tomato, but I want to start off by letting you guys know that I am not going to be talking about Link's Awakening, Mario Land: The Six Golden Coins, Tetris, or Wario Land 3, and that's because that should be on everybody's list. Those games are fantastic. They're some of the best of all time.
And that just wouldn't really be a me list, you know? That would be a list for everybody, and this is the games I keep coming back to. Plus those 4, so yeah, those still are out there, but there's more than just those 4 games on the Game Boy. Now we're talking about the tomato. That's right, it's tomato season time, and we are talking about a game that was, released by Acclaim, but developed by Atlus. Yes, the guys behind Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. Comes Quirk, a game about a punk rock tomato. It's an awesome puzzle game. I really enjoy this one, and it's as simple as can be. You're just, moving spinny things and sliding blocks around and filling in gaps so you can make your way to the stairs, and every once in a while you got to tag team in someone else to help you move stuff around, and it's a great game. Like, it's super simple, and I really wish that this is something that I was better at, but I think my logic has kind of just degraded since I was a kid, but this is something I played very frequently when I was younger, and I used to be able to fly through levels, and as you guys can see from the footage, that is no longer the case. It's a really good game, though. If you haven't played Quirk, one of the real things I really like about this is that even though this was developed by Atlus, bonus, it's not a stupid expensive game. Loose, it's only a $10 cart, and complete in box is $40, so you can add an awesome Atlus game to your collection from the list of fantastic titles they released on the Game Boy and the NES. Check out Quirk if you haven't done so already. Aside from Super Mario Land, Follow the Foot Clan, and Tetris, Motocross Maniacs is the game that I had the most playtime on the first year I owned my Game Boy. This was probably my favorite game of all of them just because it was something completely different than anything I'd ever really played before. I'd done some time with Excitebike, but this was Excitebike to the 10th degree. You had loop-the-loops, you had crazy nitrous boosts that you were able to launch yourself off of ramps, you had awesome challenges and crazy, physics puzzles where you had to just flip the bike right in order to keep driving to get onto the upper levels. It was just such a wonderful game, and it kind of prepped me for liking games today like Trials. And it still plays great today. Like, getting back to it now and jumping back into it, the muscle memory just kicked in, and it was just like riding a bike, for lack of a better term. It's a wonderful game. There were a lot of attempts on the original Game Boy to put out platforming versions on the Game Boy of games from the NES, and I don't think any of them were really quite as successful as Ninja Gaiden Shadow. The Mega Man games are very close, and I really was almost putting them on this list, but Ninja Gaiden Shadow just nailed it. It plays beautifully well, the look is spectacular, the challenge is really high, it's just like a Ninja Gaiden game, go figure. And it plays so close to the NES originals that you can just drop in and enjoy it. That's a rare thing to find. Usually there's a lot of limitations in play where it doesn't quite feel perfect when you compare it to what the NES game, its big brother, was like. This one's pretty close, though. This is a really solid title, a lot of fun with a great challenge and a fantastic look with some spectacular gameplay. And I'm not sure a lot of people have actually played this one. This feels like something that a lot of folks might have overlooked, so if you're a Ninja Gaiden fan, be sure to check out Ninja Gaiden Shadow. While we didn't get a proper Final Fantasy game on the Game Boy, we did get Final Fantasy Legend, and that was the introduction in a roundabout way to one of my favorite Square IPs, and that is the Saga series. You're able to create a party of 4 different characters utilizing a bunch of different options. You have humans and mutants, and then a bunch of different monsters that you're able to add to your party. And the game is just a really well-designed RPG. Now, it's not a Final Fantasy game, and that is critical. So if you're going into this expecting a Final Fantasy-esque story, you're not going to get that. This is a game where you're going through it to try to transform your characters, to find different monsters and robots to fight and eat, believe it or not. Like, you actually eat their meat in order to change. It's a weird game. The mechanics are great, though. I really do like the story in this one, but it is decidedly not a Final Fantasy game, so understand that. And I really, really like the soundtrack to it. This is a wonderful title, and it's just a lot of fun to play. Like, this is one that I remember when I initially got it, I was kind of bummed because I was expecting Final Fantasy 1, and instead playing it for a little while, I got something that was so much better. One of Shigeru Miyamoto's best games is a little game on the Game Boy called Mole Mania. First off, Nintendo, where's our sequel? We need a sequel to Mole Mania. This game is absolutely brilliant. You play as a mole, go figure, and your job is to make your way through these different puzzle levels by digging your way up from underground to avoid enemies or to be able to pop up and grab an item and attack an enemy with it. It's deceptively simple. Like, on paper, it's the best part of what every Miyamoto game is. A very basic premise, but the gameplay and the level designs add the complexities. And that's really what you need, especially on the Game Boy. One of the things I really like about this game is that the levels are static. You do go to different parts of the levels, but the ones you're working on don't move, so you avoid any of the ghosting that would appear on levels that have a lot of scrolling in the background. So rather than kind of getting distracted by ghost images on a puzzle game, you just have one screen to work with. It works incredibly well. The puzzles are deceptively difficult, but they're really fun to solve, and there's a great sense of accomplishment when you finally do. Mole Mania is a legit unsung classic on the Game Boy, and if you haven't played it, you need to. I've talked about Donkey Kong for the Game Boy several times on my channel in the past, and I want to reiterate how great of a title this is. So not only do you get the classic Donkey Kong on here, or at least an adequate enough version of it based on the limited size of the Game Boy screen, you also get our introduction to what would eventually become the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series on the Game Boy Advance. After you beat those first 4 levels of classic Donkey Kong, you start getting puzzle fights. And they're fantastic. You have different jumping abilities for Mario. You're able to pick objects up and throw them at bad guys. You're able to grab hammers and kill the bad guys and try to make your way across the map without getting electrocuted or falling too far or having someone just pop up on the screen and attack you. It's a really fantastic title. It's probably my favorite version of Donkey Kong across the board. Like, as much as I love the arcade original and the NES release, I actually think this is my favorite one because it had the audacity to try something different. And that's really cool. I started my journey with Pokemon on Pokemon Blue, but my favorite version of that Gen 1 release was Pokemon Yellow. As great as those original games were, Red and Blue, Pokemon Yellow did something really special. It embraced the anime side of things as well. It wasn't just strictly the game universe. They brought in the anime aspect, and I really appreciated that. I thought it was wonderful to have Pikachu follow you around as opposed to just staying in a Pokeball. I liked that Team Rocket looked like Jesse and James from the show. I liked the different options that were added, like Surfing Pikachu and things like that, that made the game a little bit more lighthearted than the original ones. And I really loved playing this on its initial release, and I love playing it today. I've got both the original Game Boy cart as well as owning it on my 3DS Virtual Console. This game is so good. This is Burger Time Deluxe, and while it doesn't stray very far from the original concept of what Burger Time does, it's just a great title to play. It works. It shouldn't. It is incredibly cramped on the small Game Boy screen, but it just works, and it plays brilliantly well. You're Peter Pepper. You are the chef making the burgers, and first off, I wouldn't eat at his restaurant. He has to walk on all the food in order to get it to the burger serving station. Maybe that is a burger serving station. I'm not sure. Regardless, I wouldn't eat there. I don't think his place has a health certification. Anyway, this is Burger Time Deluxe. I really love this game. It's a great version of Burger Time. It's a faithful adaptation with a spin, with a twist, it's Burger Time with a little bit of stank on it. And it's really fun. It's a great playing game. It looks good for what it is, despite the fact that screen is cramped down, and the challenge is absolutely there. It's a great puzzle platformer with some really fun just gameplay. Like, this is a great arcade game, and to have it portably on the Game Boy was an absolute treat. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan is by no means the best Ninja Turtles handheld game ever made. Might be one of the worst, if I'm being honest with you, but there's a lot of nostalgia goggles happening with this game that makes me love it. This was something that I used to play constantly when I was younger, and it's something that when I picked the game back up, I immediately just fell back into adoring everything about the game and dove deep on the title. And, well, not super deep, let's be honest. It's not a terribly long game. I think I beat it in like 2 hours, but it's a super fun game. I really like it. I think it looks really good for what it is. I mean, all the turtles look the same, and the weapons don't really look like the weapons, and the boss fights aren't exactly challenging, and the level designs leave a lot to be desired, but I still love the game. I know it sounds like I don't like it, but I actually think it's a really fun title. It's something I go back to pretty regularly because it doesn't require a lot of brain power to enjoy it. You can just kind of turn it on, tune in, and tune out, have a good time. Sometimes that's all you really need. Okay, now while Tetris didn't make the list because it would have been on everybody's list, and I already explained that part, this one does make the list, and this is one of my absolute favorite puzzle games of all time, and as much as I love the NES original release of Dr. Mario, I actually prefer the Game Boy version of it. I think that they really made magic here with this Game Boy release. Like, it is designed perfectly for the Game Boy screen, and while they don't have those bright, vivid colors that they had on the NES release, the shades that they add to the different viruses and the different pills just make it super easy to play, and I can't state enough how much I appreciate that. This is a game I played constantly when I was a kid, and I lost it along the way, and this is actually probably the first retro game that I bought that got me started back into collecting retro games when we moved up here to Michigan. My wife and I went to an estate sale, and there it was for like $3, and I grabbed it then. Again, it is my preferred way to play this game, and it is actually my preferred version of these kind of dropper puzzle games. I like this even more than I like Tetris. Today, I am giving you 10 DS games that I keep going back to in 2023, and we are starting right... Wait! Before we start, should let you know this is all captured off of an emulator, so if you see some mouse pointers or anything like that, that's what's up. Up until the release of Tetris Effect on the PlayStation VR, Tetris DS is probably my actual favorite version of the game, even exceeding the original release on the Game Boy back in the late 80s. And that's because they actually dared to be creative with the way the game was implemented and designed. First and foremost, every single game mode is themed to a different Nintendo property, and there's a ton of modes to choose from. To start with, there's Classic Tetris, where you're dropping blocks and clearing lines. That's represented by Super Mario Bros. Mission mode swaps in changeable goals that appear on the top screen and are themed to The Legend of Zelda. Push mode is my personal favorite. Both players are utilizing the same board, and clearing lines will push things further into your opponent's zone, giving them less time to react. This one's themed after Donkey Kong and has a spectacular soundtrack. Catch mode, themed after Metroid, allows you to control a rotating block that catches other falling pieces. And puzzle mode is themed to Yoshi's Cookie and gives you limited pieces that you will need to use to clear out the game. It's one of the best puzzle games on a console that is notorious for fantastic puzzle games. It's a fantastic spin on the classic formula, and it plays brilliantly well to this day, and it's something I go back to all the time. Man, we really got spoiled by Konami starting with Symphony of the Night, didn't we? Because there was just like this string of incredible Castlevania games, and one of my favorites is this guy right here, Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. This is the sequel to Aria of Sorrow, and it takes a lot from that original game, but it pluses it and perfects it and makes it so much more better and so much more fun. And it does some really creative stuff with this game. So you have the classic kind of Symphony of the Night style gameplay where you're collecting abilities and you're collecting weapons and equipment and magic and stuff like that. That really makes it feel like you're more involved in the game and actually involved in the development of your character. But one of the things I really appreciate about this one is that it actively incorporates the touchscreen by having the magic seal system. Now, is it necessary? No, probably not, but it does make the game feel a little bit more interactive. And when companies started getting into working on the DS and they really started to utilize things like the microphone and the touchscreen and things like that, you really saw some creative endeavors that were just absolutely magnificent. And Dawn of Sorrow is so high on the list to show just this amazing creative energy and style that Konami was known for at the time. This is one of the best Castlevania games made. I firmly believe that, and it's something that I just love going back to whenever I have the opportunity. Of course, Mario Kart DS is on this list because it is one of the best Mario Kart experiences ever made. As much as I love Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I think my favorite memories, outside of probably playing Mario Kart Double Dash with a bunch of friends, was Mario Kart DS. Back at EA, we used to get together and play Mario Kart DS on our breaks. We would pile a bunch of us into the break room, use the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, and share a game between all of us. And we'd all hop in, we'd all play a bunch of different races on our break time, and just have a wonderful experience playing together. I used to play regularly with my friend Defaz, and this was something that we would get a bunch of our testers together and we'd play, because one of the awesome things about this game is you didn't need to have multiple copies for people to play. You just set up the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, or DS download play, I don't remember what it was called, one of the two. And you would be able to share that game out and play a race, and people would just have to bring their DS and not necessarily need to own the game. And I loved that experience, and it is one of my most favorite memories of working at EA, was being able to just share that camaraderie together with my friends and play Mario Kart. I don't need to talk too much about why this game is great, because, I mean, it's Mario Kart, they're all fantastic, but those memories I have of it are going to be eternally positive for me. I'm so excited that we're getting the Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp releasing soon, because I'm such a huge fan of this series, and that extends onto the DS. Talking right now about Advance Wars Dual Strike. Now, you can't go wrong with either Advance Wars game on the DS. They're both fantastic, but talking about Dual Strike right now, mainly because I want to save some material for future iteration of this video, but it's a familiar format, right? Like, if you've played any Advance Wars game before, you've played this one, you have a basic understanding of what needs to happen here. You're moving your troops around the map, combating the forces of the enemy armies, and making sure that you're able to defeat them using your CO powers, using your different units and their abilities to make sure that you're positioning yourself correctly and using the right defensive strategies to make sure that you're not going to be defeated immediately. They're a fantastic title with a wonderful writing that often gets overlooked. Like, there's not a ton of storyline in these games, but the story that is there is really fun. It's really charming, and the characters are memorable and enjoyable. I love the Advance Wars series. They will probably always be featured on any video where I'm actually revisiting a console where something from the Advance Wars or the Battalion Wars series is in there, because each and every one of them is fantastic. Hell yes, I'm talking about Hatsworth again. I don't give a damn. This is one of my favorite games that I ever worked on. I firmly believe that Henry Hatsworth and the Puzzling Adventure is the best DS game that most of you have never heard of unless you've been watching the channel for a while, and you're probably going, oh my god, Jay, stop talking about this game. But let me tell you about it if you do not know Hatsworth. Hatsworth is a blend of both action platformer and puzzle game, where both screens are actively playing a different game at the same time, and you're going to have to hot swap between them in order to influence what is happening in the game. So as you play on the top screen and you're going through the platformer and you're defeating enemies, they're going to be sent to the bottom screen. And of course, as they start climbing on the screen, as that bottom screen is always moving, if you are not able to swap and match the blocks to get the enemies defeated on the bottom screen, they're going to come back up onto the top screen. Now, Hatsworth is hard enough as is, so having more enemies just show up unexpectedly when you're not paying attention to the puzzle aspect of the game is going to make things just overwhelming and just insanely hard. This is one of my favorite titles. It has one of the best soundtracks in gaming, period. Not just on the DS, but in gaming. The soundtrack is amazing, the style is fantastic, and it is just literally one of the best titles on the DS that everyone should take the time to play. There are a few things that I think the DS does better than puzzle games, and Meteos Disney Magic is one of my absolute favorites. First off, kudos to the designers for making this a game that you hold like a book. You actually hold the DS sideways rather than straight up and down, which I think is an underutilized and creative way to play the game. Now, the game itself is magnificent. This is set in, it's a Disney-themed one, so you're having a bunch of different Disney cartoons that you're going to be kind of working around. And what you have to do is you just have to launch bricks up into the sky. It seems pretty simple, right? But it's actually kind of difficult. So each level is going to have different aspects that are going to
cause certain things to fly farther or certain things to go slower. Each level has a special ability that's going to key in, but you don't want to use it because if you do, you're going to lose out on bonus points, and you want the bonus points because, I mean, we're all chasing bonus points, let's be honest here, but as you launch things up into the sky, they're not going to just clear out immediately. You're going to have to keep swapping stuff and keep matching stuff as they're kind of falling back down to Earth. And if you do that, then they'll launch out and they'll clear out and you'll get the clear bonus that you're looking for. It's just a brilliant title. It's kind of hard to explain, but the gameplay is magnificent. And again, what a cool idea to set it sideways. Just a fantastic title and awesome theming with the Disney stuff. Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story is a continuation of the Mario & Luigi RPG series and is, I think, one of my favorite games on the console. Now, I understand that's kind of an obvious statement when I'm giving you a list of games I keep going back to, but I just think that this game is absolutely brilliant. The writing is just amazing. It is one of the funniest games that I've played while still having a magnificent gameplay aspect to it that doesn't just rely on the humor. There's a lot going on with what you have to do in the game. Obviously, it's a Mario & Luigi game, so the timing of the attacks and the turn-based combat is paramount to your success, but not only are you playing as Mario & Luigi in this game, you also get to play as Bowser, and there's a lot of different interactive abilities and different mini-games and things like that, and being able to use Bowser and fight the enemies and inhale them and toss them down onto the bottom screen where Mario and Luigi have to fight them because, I mean, you're crawling around inside of Bowser's body. Gross. It's just brilliant. This is such a fantastic game, and I wish the series hadn't kind of died off because I just adore it. It's one of my favorites, and to see it just kind of quietly go away is sad. I think this would be brilliant on the Switch. I think this whole series should be remastered for the Switch. I would be ecstatic to get a Mario & Luigi collection. I know for a lot of folks on the DS, the Metroid game that they prefer is Metroid Prime Hunters, and I find no fault in that. But for me personally, Metroid Prime Pinball is the way to go. I am a sucker for video pinball games. I think they're a lot of fun, and I think Metroid Prime Pinball does some really creative stuff with the genre. So straight up, it plays pretty much like a standard video pinball game. Your flippers are controlled by buttons or the D-pad. You launch Samus all over the map to try to take out anything that appears on screen or to go up ramps and things like that, but where it gets really creative is when it starts to incorporate heavy Metroid influences. So you have bombs as Samus that you're able to use, which can actually launch you up a little bit further on the play map. There are enemies that'll appear that you have to take out. There's missions in the game as you play. It reminds me a lot of Star Wars Pinball, which I have on the Switch. It's a very creative game on what could be a very simple implementation, but they didn't just take pinball at face value and leave it at pinball. They actually got creative with it and made something pretty magical here. Metroid Prime Pinball is a spectacular title. It's not Metroid Prime Hunters, and again, I understand that if that is your preferred Metroid experience on the DS, I find no fault with that, but for me, if you're looking for something that really utilizes those two screens well on the DS and does something pretty creative with pinball as a genre, Metroid Prime Pinball is the way to go. Alright, I want to let you guys in on a secret. One of my favorite type of games is a brick breaker. Now, if you've watched any of my eShop Hidden Gem videos, you know that I try to sneak a brick breaker in every few months just because I think they're awesome. An Arkanoid DS on the DS, shocker, right, based on the name, is one of the finest ever made. So, in Japan, it actually had a paddle controller included with it, which is so cool. And I really want to find one because while it's great to play with a plus control pad, the paddle is the way to go, of course. But let's talk about this game real quick, because Arkanoid DS is just fantastic. This is such a wonderful usage of the DS by having it appear on both screens and having you move back and forth and have the ball come down and the power-ups and things like that. It's wonderful. It's like playing on a vertical arcade machine, and it's just such a lovely, smooth, easy to play and easy to fall into game that is perfect for a handheld experience. one of my favorite titles, and nice little note of trivia about this one, developed by Taito, published by Square Enix. I think that's pretty cool. Little known fact about Jay, since I don't do a lot of talk about the PC on this channel, but the Heroes of Might and Magic series is in the top 10 all time for me as far as favorite series go. I think it is one of the best video game series ever made, a wonderful mix of exploration and tactical strategy, and I'm just a sucker for anything with the Might and Magic name on it, including the original Might and Magic games. Those are also great, but on the DS, Might and Magic Clash of Heroes is so creative and so incredibly well made that I have to call it out here. So this is equal parts a classic Might and Magic game with exploration and deep character interactions, as well as a really clever match 3 that is going to have you lining characters up on the screen to either attack or defend. And when you line characters up side by side, 3 in a row, they're going to create a wall, and the wall is going to get more powerful every turn that it's not interacted with. And if you line up 3 characters top to bottom, like in a column, they're going to attack the enemy or attack enemy forces that are in the playfield. It's such a creative game, and it does incredible things with what could be a very, very simple genre of being a match 3 game, but instead you get this kind of clever, almost quasi-tower defense system that incorporates match 3 mechanics. It's just a fantastic game.